Chapter 1772. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. Have you ever heard of a swordsman being worried about his own safety? But then again, I don't care about my own safety. I'm just afraid of hurting the monks. Will they give me an Arhut formation? Huaibai looked at him. If you're here to humiliate my Luo Sutian, I can't guarantee that there won't be an Arhut formation. If you're here to test your skills, the hundreds of monks here won't be afraid of being killed by the flying swords. Both sides were not polite from the start. After millions of years of conflict, the previous universe war left wounds on both sides. This was not something that could be healed with just one meeting. Lu Xiaoyi was accompanied by someone to appreciate the beauty of the heavenly palace. This was the duty of the host. The hosts gathered together to discuss this person and the hidden meaning behind this matter. It's impossible that he's just here to provoke us. He must have other motives. It's just that we're not sure yet. You said firmly. Manjushri Higgin was very calm. He's young and arrogant. It's not impossible for him to take this opportunity to suppress our Buddhism. It's just that it's not his style. He's here to talk about Buddhism, surrounded by a large army outside. And when we're not prepared, little Sea Temple Rong, Ku shook his head. Senior, you're just talking about an armchair strategist. If they're here with a large army, the best strategy would be to attack all at once. Sending one person first would be unnecessary. It would only wake us up. What's there to talk about when we're not prepared? Of course, we need to check the outside carefully, but I don't think it's a large army encircling us. The few of them argued and couldn't come up with a good idea. After all, Lu Xiaoyi's appearance was indeed unexpected. There was no context to follow, and it was too sudden. In the end, it was Jiayi Mountain Zhao Jing's words that got everyone's agreement. Why think so much and add to your worries? If a Taoist from Luo Sutian makes us suspicious, I don't think this so-called heaven is the heaven. What's wrong with treating it as an ordinary fanatic visiting? Just spread some people outside and let everyone see what kind of person this so-called heaven's pride is. There's no need to be afraid and hold back. It's his fortune to be able to leave this place alive. If he dies, it's his own death. Just like every Taoist who accidentally entered this place. The calmer we are, the more meaningless his so-called backup plans are. It's useless to think too much. Monk Tuo's voice was as loud as a bell. What you really have to be careful of is that you can't embarrass yourself during the competition. If we can suppress him, his true intentions will naturally be revealed. If we can't suppress him, then there's nothing we can do. We can only let him be arrogant and take whatever he wants. Therefore, Huaibai concluded, in that case, we need to consider the candidates carefully. Those who are ambitious but don't have enough strength should not go up. Let's decide the order later. Although this person is only a primordial spirit, his hands are full of blood. He has killed more than 5 young spirit cultivators, and they are mainly from our Buddhist lineage. Now, I see that this person has taken another step forward in the ancient technique. His strength definitely cannot be underestimated. Let me tell you the truth. In terms of life and death, none of us here may be his opponent. But since we are competing in the realm of Buddha, this is our chance. The conflict between Buddhism and Taoism has a long history. It is a battle of orthodoxies. It's fine if ordinary people come here and use some tricks, but this person is different. He is an influential figure in Taoism for thousands of years. It should be resolved in the way of a battle of orthodoxies. Once people know that I, Luo Sutian, have played tricks behind his back, I'm afraid it will damage the reputation of Easter Heaven Buddhism. I'm guessing that he may have such a purpose. After all, we don't know what's in the interior heaven. Huaibai's words were very vague. In fact, what he meant was that they didn't know the methods of the interior heaven. Could there be something similar to the eye of heaven observing here? Therefore, there was no need to use underhanded methods. It was also to guard against this swordsman's possible backup. Didn't you want to challenge Luo Sutian's 100 celestial palaces with your own strength? Or only use the Buddha vein Tao? Well, we're not afraid of losing face. We'll play with you like this. There are nearly 100 schools of Buddhism here. There are a lot of things to be done. We'd like to see what kind of tricks you, a Taoist, can play with your little Buddhist Tao realm. The airspace near Luo Sutian's celestial palaces, one on the left and one on the right, were clearly separated. There was also a great disparity. On one side, there was a group of hundreds of monks. On the other side, there was only one. Just like when traveling monk Sun came to the small Thunder Temple, there were demons and ghosts with evil intentions all around. He didn't feel any pressure to fight against the celestial. This was the void of a universe. He had countless methods to move freely here. Huaibai chanted the name of Buddha. Amipa, fellow Taoist, you came here because of your own fate. Fortune and misfortune are up to the heavens. Since you have the intention to compete with Buddhism, you should know that Buddhism is boundless. Here, Buddha is born from 100 veins. Don't say that we have the advantage in numbers. Lu Xiaoyi sneered. Since it's a competition, there should be punishment. If I'm not as good as you, I'll stay here to worship Buddha for 100 years. If you can't do it, you have to help me do something. Do you have any objections? Huaibai's long eyebrows twitched. Us Buddhist disciples never make false promises. You want us to betray Buddhism and kill. Do you think we'll do as you wish? Lu Xiaoyi smiled. You have the right to refuse, but you have to be impartial and not use the suspicion of Buddhism as an excuse. Is this fair? Huaibai knew what he meant. It seemed like this matter had nothing to do with the conflict between Buddhism and Taoism. What kind of problem could make a Taoist genius like him seek help from Buddhism? But since there was a clue, there was no need to guess blindly. Us Buddhists have always followed the rules of the cultivation world. Just like when you come here today, even if you're alone, we'll still be polite. All right, I'll promise you. If there's a result, Luo Sutian will act according to his heart and will not deliberately make things difficult for you. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. If that's the case, please enlighten me. Luo Sutian's monks touched each other with their divine senses. They already had a plan. One of the monks stepped out from the crowd, but it wasn't any of the 7 great Buddhas. Monk Pu Song of the 6th Tao Temple. The monk didn't say much. With a Buddhist chant, Lu Xiaoyi felt as if he had entered the 6th Tao, Samsara. The Tao of reincarnation was a Tao that both Taoism and Buddhism highly respected. To Buddhism, they were more used to putting karma and reincarnation together to deduce. It was a preaching of karma. Buddhism believed that people who did good and evil would have retribution in their next life. Life and death continued in the 6th Tao of heaven, man, evil god, hell, hungry ghost, and beast. Just like Monk Pu Song chanted in a low voice, Benefactor, a grain of rice is as heavy as Mount Meru. Even if you can't reach Tao in this life, you'll still be alive. This was the Tao of reincarnation. To put it simply, one wouldn't seek fate if they froze to death, wouldn't beg for alms if they starved to death, and wouldn't seek fate if they were poor. It was also an important branch of the Tao of reincarnation. Luo Sutian was a heaven's chosen in the first battle. He was a little arrogant because the Tao of reincarnation was a Tao that both Taoism and Buddhism were proficient in. He wanted to show that he wouldn't take advantage of his opponent. Of course, Lu Xiaoyi could only use the Tao of reincarnation or other Taoist realms of Buddhism. If you insist on using the flying sword to simulate the thunder of slaughter, you might win. But if you lose in terms of Buddhism, it would go against Lu Xiaoyi's intention. Chapter 1773. Lu Xiaoyi understood that as long as he broke the rules, the monks would no longer need to follow the rules. This was a tacit understanding. He also knew about reincarnation, but Taoism's reincarnation was based on natural reincarnation and rarely involved karma. This was the fundamental difference in reincarnation between Buddhism and Taoism. The corpse lotus reincarnation, will of nature that was left to him by the 3 Qin, was the direction he explored in the Tao of reincarnation. Of course, it cannot be compared to Pu Song's Tao of karma reincarnation that he had cultivated for thousands of years, but it was not to the extent of losing. It was just that he was at a disadvantage in the 6 paths of reincarnation. In such a Tao state, in the constant changes of heaven, man, evil god, hell, hungry ghost, and beast, he had to guard himself. Otherwise, he would follow the rhythm of the monks and eventually lose himself in the six paths of reincarnation, becoming a hungry ghost and beast. A battle like this was a battle of pure grand Tao concepts. The mysterious and unfathomable secret techniques of the Buddhist sect couldn't be used. Of course, the special skills of sword cultivator couldn't be used either. It looked like a battle of words, but if the Tao realm cultivator couldn't win, then their lives would still be in danger. Of course, both sides would not go so far. Lu Xiaoyi could certainly use the flying sword to disrupt the rhythm of the monk's Tao state, but if he did so, he would lose. In the stalemate, he also wrote a verse. The six paths of reincarnation are bitter. The grandson marries the grandmother. Cows and sheep are the seed of honor. The six families are cooked in the pot. He was actually secretly learning from them. The universe was about to enter the middle stage. Among the next 20 over innate Taos, many were unique to Buddhism or shared by Taoism and Buddhism, such as Yin virtue, fortune, nirvana, return to one, karma, reincarnation, and so on. Time was tight, so it would be difficult to find a quiet place to study and a suitable teacher. He was confident that he could master these Taos because of their foundation. Firstly, he had a rudimentary understanding of them, and secondly, he could benefit from the fragments of Taos. But in the process of comprehending the first 12 Taos, he understood that these 2 points alone were not enough for him to meet the requirements of the Tao state. He still needed to work hard and learn from others. When learning the great Tao, the biggest taboo was to stick to one Tao and ignore all other thoughts and concepts. The harm of doing so was to narrow the path of one's great Tao. So, to learn more about others' Tao was very beneficial. To a swordsman like him, where could he find so many who were willing to teach him wholeheartedly? They could only do so through battle. Fighting nonstop. Learn from your opponent. He would complete his plan while completing his own cultivation. Integrating his cultivation into his mission was also his specialty. The great Tao of reincarnation was a great Tao that needed to be refined by him. Encountering Pu Song was also his luck. Of course, he could not use it. He used the merit and impermanence that he was most familiar with to break through the situation. He would persevere for as long as he could, and while persevering, he would understand the results of other people's reincarnation. In the 6 paths of reincarnation, he was always in the heaven, man, and demonic god, but he never entered the hell, hungry ghost, or beast path. The 6 paths of reincarnation killing technique require the opponent to go through the 6 paths of reincarnation. Otherwise, the technique would be incomplete. This was a unique characteristic of battles between Tao realm cultivators. Among the onlookers, the experts saw the artistry, while the laymen saw the excitement. However, there were few Buddhists who did not know about the cycle of reincarnation. They might not be as specialized as Pu Song, but they had a general insight. They could tell that although swordsman was in a passive situation, he was still far from being in danger. This person has some foundation in samsara, but it's far from enough to win. He would definitely use other Tao realm cultivators to help him, but I can't think of what he would use. Do any of you have any idea? Higgin asked. Everyone shook their heads. There were a few great Taos that could counter the cycle of reincarnation. For example, breaking through the merit and virtue would prevent reincarnation. Breaking through the nirvana would prevent reincarnation. Breaking through the impermanence would disrupt the cycle of reincarnation. There were many ways. However, this swordsman's method was very strange. He only went back and forth between the heaven, man, and demonic god paths. It was a very childish method. The display of the Tao realm didn't mean that you would never be able to go to hell or become an animal just because you were in the upper 3 realms of the 6 realms. This was just a concept. The key was the power of the 6 realms as a whole. It was not completely meaningless. At least, the swordsman's transformation between the heaven, man, and demonic god paths in the Tao realm made Pu Song feel uncomfortable. It was as if something strange was stuffed into his body during this process. Something that no one could recognize. Life was under the 6 paths of reincarnation. The power of Tao realm was to compress this process into a very short period of time. In a real battle, your opponent would not allow you to do this. However, If it was a competition of pure Tao realm, everything was possible. Using other Buddhist Taoists to counter the swordsman's path was the main topic. If they were to use the Tao of reincarnation to counter the swordsman, they would have to compete with their understanding of the Tao. For Lu Xiaoyi's situation, this was a little unwise. However, he did it, and it made everyone suspicious. How could a famous swordsman in the universe, who had never tasted defeat, make such an obvious mistake? Although they were suspicious, Pu Song did not stop his evolution of Tao realm. After some time, the swordsman finally entered the fourth path, the path of hell. He saw hope, but he was also confused, because in his 6 paths of reincarnation, the sluggish feeling became more and more obvious. As a great Buddha, he knew very well that this meant something terrible. He could not see through his opponent's methods, and this was a very dangerous situation in a competition. Should he continue evolving the 6 paths of reincarnation, or wait a little longer to see it clearly? Just as he was hesitating, the swordsman seemed to have made a mistake in the confrontation. The path of hungry ghost and the path of livestock were also successfully evolved. In an instant, the swordsman's figure had been reincarnated once in the 6 paths of reincarnation. No, there seemed to be another path added. There was an inexplicable 7th path that might or might not exist. The system collapsed. This was a denial of the 6 paths of reincarnation. The 6 paths of reincarnation became the 7 paths. Did this mean that his thousands of years of effort were all wrong? Pu Song's Tao realm collapsed, but his body was not injured. However, he was injured because of his confusion towards the Tao. His face was pale, and his mind was in a mess. He staggered back until he was out of the range of the competition. Then he regained his composure and bowed with his palms together. Amazing benefactor, this little monk was defeated, and I didn't even understand what I lost to. Lu Xiaoyi smiled faintly. He had gotten what he wanted and had also trained what he wanted to strengthen. This kind of Tao realm battle was very worth it. It's just the Tao of creating something out of nothing. The monks were moved. How could there be a Tao of creating something out of nothing in this world? It was just another excuse for the innate Tao. Groundless. Chapter 1774. Everyone in the interior realm was confused about the groundless existence, not to mention those in the lower realm's main world. This was a Tao that might or might not exist. It was beyond everyone's expectation that someone could specialize in such a Tao. You couldn't say that the groundless existence wasn't a Buddhist Tao, just like the Tao of reincarnation was actually involved in both Taoism and Buddhism. Why use the groundless existence to break the Tao of reincarnation? Lu Xiaoyi had a deep consideration for this. Firstly, the groundless existence was one of the 36 innate Taos. It was also a Tao that Lu Xiaoyi had to master. Moreover, he had a new and unique understanding of the groundless existence by chance. He suddenly realized that the groundless existence was actually a Tao of variables, not the Tao of emptiness. This provided him with a unique way of understanding. Secondly, the Tao of the groundless existence was originally made up by him in the interior realm. At that time, it was to cover up his real Tao of integration of the big and small universes. He didn't expect that there would be an unexpected surprise in this cover-up. Since it had been publicized in the interior realm, there was no need to hide it in the main world. Finally, it was his consideration of the hundreds of Buddhist veins in Luo Sutian. Many of these people were great Buddhas and the existence of Yang's spirit. The rest were at least primordial spirit monks. If he wanted to steal in front of such a group of experienced monks, he could not hide it for long. After a few rounds, his abnormal way of competing in the Tao state would arouse the monks' suspicion. It would not be difficult for them to guess what he was thinking. Therefore, there must be a new thing that everyone was interested in, such as the groundless existence. Even if the Buddhas were very suspicious, this suspicion was not worth mentioning in front of new Tao. The purpose was to use the spirit of exploration of new things to dilute their doubts and achieve his own goal. Therefore, Even if he could use his own understanding of reincarnation and impermanence of merit to solve quickly, he didn't do so. Instead, he wasted time using the groundless existence. One was to observe the other's reincarnation Tao, and the other was to use his own groundless existence. It was like killing two birds with one stone. He was a half-immortal who had taken a step forward. Perhaps in terms of cultivation, he could not compare with these great Buddhas at the yang spirit level, but in terms of understanding the Tao realm, he had taken a step forward first, so he had his own advantages. The Luo Sutian monks felt that they had an advantage. They had so many different Buddhist veins as their foundation, and so did Lu Xiaoyi. Lu Xiaoyi won the first round, which was nothing new. With his current reputation in the universe, it would be strange if he lost. He was no longer an ant now, but a thief that had crossed the river. He was able to move about freely and was rarely matched. This was the proof of his countless accomplishments. The second one to enter the arena was still not one of the 7 great Buddhas. Babalo Temple's Pan Tu monk, please correct me. Once the Tao realm appeared, light and shadow intertwined, and time reversed. This was the Vipa corpse Buddha of cultivation. Its body was born from the formless, as if it was an illusion of various images. The illusionary heart's consciousness was originally non-existent. Sin and happiness were both empty. There was no place for it to reside. Pipo Corpse Buddha, also known as Pipo Corpse or Weibo Corpse, was the first of the 7 Buddhas in the past. He was known as the victorious view, various views, and so on. He was the first Buddha of the 7 Buddhas in the past. In the past, there was a Buddha named Pipo Corpse Buddha. He was about 60 years old, and his Buddha light was about 120 years old. His body was purple gold and had 84,000 forms. Among the forms were 84,000 good. Among the good, there were countless golden lights. In the light, there were countless sands that turned into Buddhas. This was the foundation of the Buddha of the past. This monk had evolved the Tao of the past in the Great Tao of Time. The Great Tao of Time was still not a pure Buddhist Great Tao, but shared by Taoists and Buddhas. It seemed that the Luo Sutian monks were still very cautious. They would not easily reveal the Great Tao of Buddhism in front of outsiders. Instead, they used the shared Great Tao to deal with Lu Xiaoyi. Firstly, it was to hide it. Secondly, it was to be proud. It meant that although you came here to challenge the Great Tao of Buddhism, they thought that it was an unfair victory. Therefore, they simply used the Great Tao of Taoists and Buddhas. It was not bullying you. The Great Tao of Time was a challenge for Lu Xiaoyi. His understanding of the Great Tao of Time was still at the intermediate stage. In fact, among the remaining 20 Great Taoists, he was not familiar with most of them. He only had enough attainments in reincarnation, space, and the 5 elements. This was also the reason why he used such a method to recruit people in Luo Sutian. He would not let go of any opportunity to fight, especially this kind of opportunity to understand the various Great Tao of Buddhism. There was not much time left. He had to seize the opportunity to understand the remaining Great Tao. There were many directions of the Great Tao of Time, but there were only 2 main directions: the reverse flow and the open flow. The core of the reverse flow was to reverse the long river of time to find the true meaning of time. It must be done by finding the opponent's past weakness in battle to complete the elimination. The open flow was the opposite. It accelerated the long river of time to determine the opponent's future to achieve the purpose of influencing. At this point in the Tao realm, many great Taoists were inevitably entangled together. You could not purely use the Tao realm as an example. For example, the reverse flow of the Great Tao of Time would inevitably be entangled with karma and reincarnation, and the open flow would be torn apart with destiny and nirvana. The sun god severing 3 lives was also in this category. The past, present, and future were more comprehensive. The Pantu monk's Tao realm was to use the change of his own past to affect the opponent's past. In this process, there would be a collision of the past to achieve the purpose of determining the winner. Lu Xiaoyi had experience in being forced out of the past. At that time, he was still a Yuanying. For this reason, he had even lost the life of a half-immortal. If a half-immortal was like this, then there was no need to mention a great Buddha. He could not say it out loud. Don't look at my past. It's not something you can bear. Although he appeared very aggressive, he did not want to kill anyone here. There were countless eminent monks of Buddhism in the East Heaven main world, and there were many of them. In order to achieve the final goal, he could be strong, but once someone died, there was no turning back. Therefore, he could not let this fool see it. The contest would begin here. The normal rhythm of a confrontation should be carried out by both sides in the countless past scenes. It was not a test of your past identity, but the control of your past identity. You were a farmer in this life, and I was a general in this life, so I could suppress you. It was not so superficial. However, Lu Xiaoyi's response was very naive. He covered his past and did not let others see it. This was impossible for others to do because it was impossible to cover countless scenes of the past. If you covered a part, you would inevitably leak some parts. But what surprised all the monks was that the swordsman had used some unknown method to cover all of it. Was this caused by the difference between a half-immortal and a sun god? The monks could only think so. But what they did not know was that the truth was not that complicated. The reason why he could cover all of it was very simple. Because Lu Xiaoyi only had 2 scenes of the past. What was impossible for others was very simple for him. Chapter 1775. While guarding his past, Lu Xiaoyi naturally began to mix in sand and muddy the variables that he was now very used to. Muddy the Tao was very useful, especially when he didn't use his flying sword and was purely competing with his Tao state. He could almost simulate any variables of the Tao state and use them to confuse his opponent's attention. From there, he could observe his opponent's changes and conceal his goal. He no longer had the aggressive, fiery aggressiveness that only belonged to sword cultivators. In the eyes of the monks of Louis Sushin, who would believe that he was a swordsman just based on his performance, he was a proper spell cultivator dawdling. Why is he hiding? This doesn't make sense. From the perspective of a confrontation, it's not wise to spend time and effort on hiding. It's not in line with the sword vein style. Is there a problem with his past? Monk Tuata'al was very confused. Old Nun Rong Ku also said, letting go of the seal of the past and looking for a confrontation with the past is the best way. Not to mention the swordsman who views offense as his life. Even other orthodoxies understand this point. There must be a reason. I heard that there's a type of person in this world who can cut off time and space. Could it be because of this? He was very confused. This method of concealing the past is not feasible in a normal battle. At that time, both sides would strive to slash the present world. Who would have the time and energy to hide the past? That's why I think it's not difficult to see the swordsman's past. We just need to jump out of the Tao state and fight normally. However, Huai Bai had a different opinion. Could this be a trap set up by the swordsman? He can't fight freely in the Tao state, so he wants us to change the way he fights? Is it beneficial for us to fight the swordsman without rules? The few of them had their own guesses and couldn't come to a conclusion. However, gradually, the rhythm was brought to the swordsman's strange Tao state and the mystery of his past. Few people thought that he might have other motives. This was the effect Lu Xiaoyi wanted to achieve, throwing a brick to attract jade. The reason he threw out the groundless was to make the monks forget the necessary vigilance. He wanted the monks to see the groundless, and at the same time, he wanted to see the different Tao realms of the monks. It could be considered an exchange of Tao realms. He had to show some sincerity if he wanted to steal their techniques, right? After all, the Panhead monk's ability is still far inferior to that half-immortal from back then. Furthermore, Lu Xiaoyi is no longer the little Yuanying from back then. Therefore, he was unable to forcefully break through his opponent's concealment of the past. While Lu Xiaoyi was using these methods to confuse his own past, he slowly accumulated a lot of experience and finally began to confuse his opponent's past. This was also the beginning of his attack. His goal was very clear. He wanted to turn the bow-headed monk's past into a pile of paste. He wanted to mix in countless variables so that he would have no choice but to spend a lot of time sorting out his past. This kind of fighting style was very much like that of a cultivator. It was the mainstream of the cultivation world, unlike the swordsman style of drawing blood with every strike. The panhead monk had no choice. He couldn't see his opponent's past, but his own was being torn apart and tainted. He made a prompt decision and jumped out of the circle. Benefactor's Tao realm is amazing. His defense is like a tortoise, and his attack is like stirring shit. This poor monk is no match for him. I admire him. The old monk was somewhat unsatisfied. He only felt that this Tao realm competition was very vexing. This was the characteristic of the pure, ideological Tao realm. You could think that it was very mysterious, very high-end, and very imposing. However, it lacked the refreshing feeling of punching flesh. It wasn't as satisfying as the Tao realm like Thunderslaughter. Therefore, although he admitted defeat, his words were filled with great resentment. A punch landed on a cotton flower. He had the strength, but couldn't use it. This was the charm of the Tao realm. The few great Buddhas in charge communicated with each other. After these 2 rounds, they spent a lot of time. Combined with the news from the periphery of Luo Sutian, they had a rough judgment. Huaibai chanted, Amitabha. From this person's attack, we still don't know how high his understanding of Buddhism's Tao is, but at least we know 3 points. Firstly, this person doesn't have the heart to kill. Secondly, there are no hidden enemies in the periphery. Lastly, this groundless thing is very interesting. Then, purely from the Tao realm, which of us here hasn't been immersed for a few thousand years more than him? With nearly 100 people here, how can he break them all with one Tao? It's useless to think too much. First, use your real ability to subdue him, then talk about other things. When we Buddhism do things, we always repay kindness with kindness. If there's a grudge, there's a grudge. If he didn't hurt anyone in these 2 rounds, we'll return the favor by not harming him in these 2 rounds. If he can always hold on to such propriety, then this round will be just a battle between Taoists and Buddhists. Let the world know that in terms of breadth of mind, we Buddhism are much stronger than Taoists. After the monks of Luo Sutian confirmed, they finally began to fight for their orthodoxy. It was also from the 3rd round that the pure Tao realm of Buddhism became the mainstream. It was pressure, but also the source of knowledge. When the monks tried their best, Lu Xiaoyi's groundless beginner would find it difficult to achieve success. He had no choice but to bring out his own merit and impermanence abilities to help. After all, this was the joint representative office of the East Heaven Main World's Buddhism. The people gathered here were not ordinary people. They all held important positions in their respective orthodoxies. None of the monks were easy to deal with. They were the result of thousands of years of cultivation. Such a method of learning while competing was the best method for the current Lu Xiaoyi. If it was someone else, they wouldn't be able to understand it. However, he had the foundation of 36 Taos and the depth of knowledge of 12 Taos. Many things were no longer so mysterious in his eyes once he used them. When the Tao realm competition was no longer about life and death, the arrogant habits of the cultivators were undoubtedly revealed. Most of the time, there was no need to completely determine the winner before stopping. Often, when the Tao had been exhausted and there was no other way, they would take the initiative to withdraw. There were also many virtuous monks in Buddhism. They were not a group of narrow-minded snobbish people. Those who could cultivate to such a level were rarely scoundrels. In the eyes of these virtuous people, sword cultivators had given up on their own supreme flying swords and switched to competing in the realm of Tao. They were fighting 1 against 100, yet they were still fussing over minor matters and pestering them endlessly. This in itself was a sign that they were not broad-minded enough. It was also at this moment that the astute Lu Xiaoyi accurately grasped the direction of the situation. When he faced the Tao of Nirvana of the Great Compassion Zen Temple, he took the initiative to surrender. "I can't do it. Master, you're just a rock, and it's the lifeless kind." In fact, it wasn't that he lost, but that he couldn't continue. If he had surrendered at the beginning of the battle, he would be regarded as a useless spearhead that didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. However, if he surrendered after a series of victories, he would be regarded as a stubborn junior who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. The effect was even better. This was because it meant that both sides recognized each other. They were no longer thinking about winning or losing, but purely pursuing the concept of Tao. This was originally the attitude of the cultivators. It was the norm before ancient times, but now it was mixed with too many selfish thoughts. Fortunately, it was back on the right track. Chapter 1776. Seeing that Lu Xiaoyi was about to give up, the monks were unwilling. After all, who wouldn't want to experience the unwarranted weirdness? Huaibai smiled and said, "You don't have to worry about victory or defeat. Benefactor's Tao state is very unique. Many of the senior and junior brothers here want to give it a try. We will all do our best. Don't hold back. Just enjoy yourself." Lu Xiaoyi sighed in his heart. His hidden intentions were seen through. But it didn't matter. In the eyes of these monks, no Tao state could stop others from improving just by hiding. You hide, I hide too. Everyone is at the same place. You're selfless, I'm Dafa. Everyone has something to gain. Which is better? No one needs to teach. The Tao state competition was still going on, but it had completely changed. Lu Xiaoyi didn't really understand. Unknowingly, something started to show in him. That was the art of language, the way of behavior, and the unique affinity formed by the best performance in a unique environment. It could make people unknowingly give up their prejudices. This was very swordsman, but he knew that if he wanted to achieve his goal, he couldn't walk the same path as his seniors. He hoped that when he stepped forward, even if he had to be the enemy of the entire immortal court, there would be countless friends behind him. He refused to be a lone hero, even if it was the most popular image in the biography. Tonglao Ancient Temple, please enlighten me. Nirvana Tao state was similar to marching army monk, but this monk focused more on self-nirvana. He didn't use the method of invading the opponent's ego. Was it because he couldn't or wasn't willing? Lu Xiaoyi had been sparring with the monks of Luo Sutian for almost a month. The characteristic was that he was getting faster and faster. Most of the time, he would stop when the time was right. There were a total of 30 monks who came to ask for advice. They all thought that they had a skill in a certain Tao state. Those who were too far behind wouldn't come up. They all knew their own limits and wouldn't just make up the numbers. 1 month later, everyone dispersed. Lu Xiaoyi leisurely returned. Only now did he truly have the qualifications to appreciate the close to 100 celestial palaces in Luo Su heaven. He could go wherever he wanted. Not only would no one stop him, there would always be celestial palace masters coming out to entertain him. This was what the world of cultivation should be like. Respect for each other and not haggle over each other's orthodoxy. Unfortunately, this harmony was destined to be short-lived. It was only for this moment, this place, this scene. Luo Sutian could not represent the entire Eastern Heaven Buddhist sect, and Lu Xiaoyi could not represent Taoism. But in his heart, there was still some kind of dream. To solve the problem of 2 vicious dogs fighting for food, he could not reason with them, nor could he beat them with a stick. The only way was to find a big enough piece of meat. It was so big that it was more than enough for 2 dogs to eat. Most of the monks were serious and boring. Their conversation was as plain as water. But when the forest was big, there would always be some variation. Monk Guxing was a wonderful person in Luo Su heaven. He was very enthusiastic. He was not serious and old-fashioned like the monks. He was humorous and did not bother about trifles. Lu Xiaoyi got along well with such a person. It was not to deliberately make friends, but even if it was a crosstalk, you still need a partner, right? What made him most speechless was that Monk Guxing's celestial palace had 3 nuns serving him. It was the only one in Luo Su heaven. Of course, in this world of cultivation, there are not many rules and precepts in Buddhism. The Buddhist rules in Lu Xiaoyi's previous life were just a cosmetic ceremony in the process of spreading Buddhism. For example, shaving one's head, being a vegetarian, and not marrying. In this world of cultivation, only shaving one's head was relatively common. Not only could he have a glimpse of the Buddhist roots of this person, but he could also roughly infer that this person's status in Luo Su heaven was not low. Otherwise, he would not be able to do whatever he wanted. The two of them chatted happily and were very congenial. Monk Gu Xing simply took out some good wine. The two of them drank and chatted. Lu Xiaoyi was very curious. I see that Monk Gu Xing has reached the Yang spirit realm and is leading a palace alone. I wonder why you are hiding your strength during the comparison of realms and not willing to fight? Gu Xing pointed at him. Don't think that I don't know what you swordsmen are thinking. On the surface, you are comparing realms, but in your heart, you are disdainful. You think that it's all just talk on paper for your own entertainment. I don't fight because in the eyes of Huang Quan Temple, all battles that are not for the purpose of life and death are hooligans. Without involving life and death, how can one force out one's potential? Without facing danger, how can one go all out? I can't fake a fight like this. I might as well not do it. When the day comes when you and I have to fight for our Daos, we will fight with all our strength. It's also a happy thing in life. Lu Xiaoyi's heart was filled with sorrow. He raised his cup and the two of them drank. Gu Xing was curious. Master Lu is now the leader of the swordsmen in the main world. Why are you still willing to tolerate such a method of comparison? Isn't this a regression in the way of the sword? Lu Xiaoyi smiled, planting the green seedlings all over the field, lowering one's head to see the sky and the water. Only with a clear heart is the way. Regression is actually moving forward. What is advancement? What is retreat? Where's the fixed pattern? Cultivators should stay away from pleasure, but you have 3 nuns here to serve you. Is this advancement, or is it retreat? Gu Xing was happy and pointed at the 3 of them. Women are so charming, but they can't be confused. Dragon's musk is dark, and they wear thick makeup. People call them peonies, and Buddha calls them flowers and arrows. They shoot into the bone marrow, and they die without complaint. This is what Buddha said, not me. This poor monk's wisdom is shallow. I only know that life is short. If I don't enter hell, who will? Lu Xiaoyi didn't argue with him. There was no right or wrong in personal cultivation. Come. Let me introduce you. He pointed at the 3 nuns. This is Meng Tian, a ferryman among the clouds. The one in the middle is Xiang Tsao, a drooping lotus with a floral fragrance. The one beside her is Qing Wu, a kind and warm person. Which one is Master Lu like? Just say the word. This monk really didn't have a filter on his mouth. In just one sentence, he introduced the characteristics of the nuns incisively and vividly. Even the thick-skinned Lu Xiaoyi couldn't stand it. That's why it was said that one shouldn't go to extremes. In a place like Luo Sutian, one could really become a pervert. Seeing that Lu Xiaoyi was a little embarrassed, Gu Xing laughed. Xianyuan's swordsman has such a day. It's really satisfying. As the two were talking and laughing, there was a sound of Sanskrit. Gu Xing stretched out his hand. It must be because of Master Lu's matter. Luo Sutian has made up his mind. Master Lu, come with me now. The two walked side by side. Not long after, they arrived at a great hall. There were already hundreds of big and small Buddhas gathered here. Obviously, the meeting had been decided. There was one more person among the leading Buddhas. It was Zhu Ming of Tongliao Temple. This monk had always kept a low profile. In fact, he was the most powerful representative of Luo Sutian. Unfortunately, his concealment was meaningless from the start. Xingjuan monk had already told him about Tongliao Temple's status. He was also the only one who had interacted with Lu Xiaoyi in the fighting realm. Looking at Lu Xiaoyi, Zhu Ming showed a trace of determination. We, Luo Sutian, have already made the decision. From today onwards, we will gather at the beast territory within 100 years. Chapter 1777. Lu Xiaoyi's heart settled. This was expected, so he wasn't surprised. Zhu Ming was very straightforward. It could be seen that this was the style of Tongliao Ancient Temple. Although it was a Buddhist sect, it had the ability to act on par with the fifth ring. Of course, this was related to the fact that they had already planned to use the Hengi boundary to make a move. After this meeting, we will set off. It's obviously impossible to inform the Buddhist realms in terms of time, so we will choose 40 great Buddhas from Luo Sutian. What do you think, almsgiver Lu? Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. I'm just a messenger. As for your allocation, it's an internal Buddhist matter. It's not my place to comment. I still have to hurry, so I won't stay any longer. The monks had no objections, but Huaibai frowned. Is almsgiver Lu's next itinerary to the Sun Peak? It's only 10 years from Luo Sutian to the Sun Peak through the reverse space, but in recent years, the reverse space has been stagnant and collapsing. Although it's only a small area, the reverse space corresponding to the Sun Peak is in the middle of it, so you can only use the main world space. In the main world space route, there's a large-scale meteorological eruption outside the Sun Peak. If you're not familiar with the route, it's easy to take a detour and waste time. Is almsgiver Lu familiar with this place? Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. I've never been there. Once my eyes go blind, I can only rely on the star map to guide me. Huaibai nodded. So, do you need someone to guide you? Lu Xiaoyi did not refuse. I'll do as you say, if it's not troublesome. Zhu Ming waved his hand. There are hundreds of monks. How can we miss one? He turned to the monks. Who is willing to guide almsgiver Lu to the Sun Peak? The monks were hesitant, not because they didn't want to take up the responsibility, but because they wanted to join the team attacking the Hengyi boundary. If they were guides, they wouldn't be able to go to the Hengyi boundary. Secondly, as guides, they had to at least be familiar with the target. If they were complete strangers, they couldn't avoid awkwardness. Gu Xing stood up. Brothers, is my name on the list going to the Hengyi boundary? Zhu Ming glanced at him. The list hasn't been decided. However, since you've spoken, it's none of your business. How about this? It's up to you to guide almsgiver Lu to Yongding. Don't cause any trouble on the way. I don't need to remind you of the importance of time. Gu Xing was a little dumbfounded. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have stepped forward. After all, to every monk, going to the Hengyi realm was a grand occasion that they yearned for even in their dreams. In a lifetime, even if they had lived as long as they did, the opportunity to slaughter a large realm was very rare. Who would be willing to miss it? Huaibai snorted and said, Go away, but don't bring those nuns with you. We can still tolerate your bad habits in Luo Sutian, but if you really take this out and treat it as a hunting trip, don't blame our Luo Sutian's rules. Obviously, the monks here were very familiar with Gu Xing's eccentricities. They then looked at Lu Xiaoyi. Almsgiver Lu, please don't blame me. This person wasn't very attentive. Other people had cards in their pockets, but he was a three-colored freak. He would play with whoever he caught. Benefactor, please don't do as he wishes. Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly. He was very angry in his heart. Did they think that he and monk Gu Xing were jackals of the same tribe? The matter had been decided. Everyone should split up and do what they wanted. Gu Xing was embarrassed, so he chattered. The combination of work and rest, the balance of yin and yang, is the only secret of cultivation. What's the difference between bringing the nuns and not bringing them with you? The two of them didn't wait for the others. They immediately got up and disappeared into the darkness. The change of the era was progressing towards the middle stage. Many natural phenomena in the universe gradually changed. For example, a situation where the space warp couldn't be open happened from time to time. For example, the Yongding region, where there were irregular outbursts of astronomical phenomena. These were all signs of a great change in the universe. Lu Xiaoyi had discovered this when he was traveling in the void. It could even occasionally affect his speed during space warp. The order was chaotic, and the sky was about to change. Gu Xing spoke casually, but he didn't do things casually. He determined the direction and swept all the way. He was as fast as lightning. Although he couldn't be compared to a swordsman like him in terms of speed, he was still very good at the sun spirit level. He was also a strong sun spirit. The direction was not facing the Yongding. Gu Xing deliberately explained, We can't go through the route facing the Yongding. A series of astronomical changes are happening there now. We estimate that these changes will continue for a long time. In the next few thousand years, there will be a lot of changes in the universe's routes. It's useless to look at the old star chart. The new star chart can't be drawn before the universe is completely stabilized. So, in the future, the main world's navigation will be troublesome. Lu Xiaoyi felt the same. Such drastic changes in the sky would only increase as the time of the change of the era approached. This was the trend, and no one could change it. The two of them were as fast as shooting stars. They didn't encounter any other cultivators along the way. Strictly speaking, Luo Sutian wasn't a world, and there were no business opportunities. So it was cold and deserted. Time was still very tight. It took 10 years to reach the Yongding from Luo Sutian in the negative space, and about 30 years to go through the main world. Even if Lu Xiaoyi arrived smoothly and successfully persuaded, there wasn't enough time left for him. It was hard to say whether he could reach the beast territory before the collapse of the 13th Dao fragment, but this wasn't a reason to give up. Compared to Luo Sutian, which represented the Buddhism of the East Heaven main world, he hoped to rope in a world like the Yongding because the conflict with the Buddhism of the main world was irreconcilable. It wasn't a cooperation that could put aside the dispute and work together. There was a fundamental difference. 20 years later, the two of them rushed forward, brushing against the edge of the violent eruption of the celestial phenomenon. The most direct impression that this celestial phenomenon gave Lu Xiaoyi was that it emitted a strong magnetic force, which would have a huge impact on all metallic objects, such as his flying sword. The strong magnetic field was known as a forbidden area in the cultivation world. It had restrictions on the techniques of most of the cultivators. Not only the swordsmen, but the techniques of the cultivators were also difficult to use. However, it wasn't as serious as the pure metal energy of the flying sword. Gu Xing smiled and said, "Swordsman Lu, if you fight with Yang Dingren, you must remember to avoid the area covered by this sky. It's very unfriendly to the swordsman." Lu Xiaoyi didn't care. "I'm a messenger of peace. I came here with the hope of peace, not to fight." Gu Xing said disdainfully, "It's like this. There are two paths. One is to take a large detour and completely avoid this celestial phenomenon. It might take 3 to 5 years. The other path is to take a shortcut. In this celestial phenomenon, there is a relatively stable canyon corridor that can save 3 to 5 years of time. However, it might be dangerous to travel through it. Furthermore, if an accident were to occur, Lu Jun, your flying sword would be greatly restricted. You are the host, so you can choose the path. If I choose, you won't start nagging me about not doing my best to lead the way." Lu Xiaoyi didn't hesitate. "Of course, the shortcut. You shouldn't ask a swordsman such a question." Chapter 1778. Gu Xing changed the direction again and led Lu Xiaoyi into a narrow passage. Lu Xiaoyi soon understood why there was such a canyon. This was an asteroid belt wrapped in a magnetic field. Due to the degaussing effect of these asteroids, it formed such a passage. It was also a masterpiece of nature. Gu Xing explained, "I've been here twice. Each time, the magnetic field was slightly stronger than the previous time. We estimate that the degaussing effect of these asteroids won't last long. In less than 1,000 years, this passage will disappear." The two of them traveled through the narrow asteroid belt. This so-called canyon was not a real canyon. It was not that they could not go around, but they would be completely exposed to the powerful magnetic field rays. These magnetic field rays were everywhere, destroying a cultivator's divine sense, perception, spell formation, and attack system. Moving in such an environment, even a floating raft would not be able to fly. A cultivator could only use their eyes to determine the direction. Even if they had the star chart, they would not be able to rely on it. Gu Xing was in front, and Lu Xiaoyi was behind. Out of habit, he began to try to display his abilities in such an environment. The result was regrettable. He was afraid that he could only display 30% or 40% of his abilities. It was basically impossible to control his flying swords here. The strong magnetic field would cause the flying sword's flight trajectory to be erratic. It was beyond the range of his divine sense control. If he wanted to form a sword river with millions of sword rays, he would be pulled away by the strong magnetic field. It was completely unsuitable for battle in such an environment. What made him even more depressed was that even his speed warp had lost its effect here. It would only work sometimes. Whether it worked or not depended on the strength of the magnetic field at that time. This was still within the so-called canyon passageway. If one were to carelessly barge into the strong magnetic environment outside the canyon, all of one's abilities would be suppressed to the point of near non-existence. Even Constellation Tila would be affected, causing him to be unable to move as fast or slow as he wished. Gu Xing was right. This place was really not suitable for a swordsman to intervene. However, he was still fearless because he believed that if he was suppressed to such an extent, others would be the same. Any cultivator who fought here would be a disaster. It meant that their thousands of years of hard work and training would be ineffective. Therefore, no one would be willing to fight in such a situation. In the cultivation world, there was a special cultivation term for strong magnetism, which was called the Meridian Divine Magnetic Ray. This thing was not something that an ordinary person could cultivate. If one wanted to cultivate it, they would need to cultivate their body into a huge magnet over a long period of time. This kind of cultivation method was actually not in line with the concept of cultivators because it rejected all other methods, leaving only the Meridian Divine Magnetic Light in the body. Under special circumstances, it could play an extraordinary role, but in most cases, if people knew that it was only the Divine Magnetic Light, they would be beaten up, because in the cultivation world, it was impossible to have something that could eat the whole world with just one move. Furthermore, cultivating the Meridian Divine Light would reject the innate Taos. Just from this point alone, no one was willing to waste their lives on such a narrow postnatal Taos. Once he practiced the Divine Light, his future would be ruined. It was a path to train oneself to become a magnet that would become bigger and bigger, purer and purer. The asteroid belt was very long and winding. There were no paths here, and all they had to do was to fly forward. However, as the guide, Gu Xing had the responsibility to fly in front. Halfway through the canyon, Gu Xing, who was in front, stopped. Lu Xiaoyi sensed something. Is there someone blocking the way? Gu Xing was usually a carefree person, but now he was a little cautious. Someone is cultivating the Meridian Divine Light in front. Who knows where they are from? The terrain is narrow, so it's inevitable that there will be collisions. The other party's attitude is unclear. How about this? To prevent us from getting trapped together, I'll go first. If they're easy to talk to, you can come back later? Lu Xiaoyi carefully sensed. Two people, primordial spirit realm? Gu Xing replied. For those who cultivate the Meridian Divine Magnetic Light, two people cultivate together the fastest. One is positive and one is negative. One is magnetic and one is polar. For people like them, they should have been cultivating here for quite some time. This is also the limitation of the Divine Magnetic Light. It only focuses on battle, but gradually drifts away from the Great Tao. Usually, they are chosen from a middle and upper-level cultivators of large factions who have no hope of reaching the Great Tao. They cultivate this battle technique in pairs. Lu Jun, don't underestimate them. They are only in the primordial spirit realm. They can make up for the difference in cultivation through the Divine Magnetic Light. Especially in such a special environment, their Divine Magnetic Light has an additional effect. Although you and I are in a higher realm than them, in this place, we might not be their match. Lu Xiaoyi disagreed. The two of us are traveling together, but Grandmaster has to lead the way for me. What kind of logic is this? The Sor vein has existed for tens of thousands of years. Have you ever heard of a swordsman cowering in the back and letting others take the risk? Gu Xing sighed. A swordsman cherishes his feathers, but a monk doesn't have any feathers? Should we just hide in the back and enjoy the fruits of others' labor? Lu Jun, in this space you are the guest, and I am the master. Since I am the master, I have to fulfill my responsibilities as the master. Senior brother Jueming Huaibi ordered me to guide you. That's not only to lead the way, but also to be responsible for your safety. Unless I follow the Buddha, or you enter the Yangding, Then if there are any problems, I have nothing to do with it. But on this road, can I just watch from the back? The two of them were arguing about who should go first because it was obviously inappropriate for the two of them to go in at the same time. In such a narrow canyon terrain, there was not enough space to fight. If a young spirit and a half-immortal went in together, it was inevitable that they would disturb each other. It was better to have one inside and one outside so that they could support each other and not be baptized by the divine magnetic light together. This was a bit ridiculous. In the void of the normal universe, any one of them could pass through. But in such an environment, facing such a special opponent, their strength had long been reduced to a state where they could not completely control themselves. This was the universe. No matter what realm a cultivator was in, as long as you could make good use of the environment, you could achieve twice the result with half the effort. Both of them were experienced battle veterans. Of course, they understood that they could not pass through together. If one of them stayed outside, no matter what happened, he could be restrained from the side and provide support from the outside. The only thing they were arguing about was who should go first. Whoever went first would face more danger. This was face, in Gu Xing's words, who didn't cherish their feathers. I'm a swordsman. I never retreat. No matter who they are, what attitude they have, I will only cut them down with my sword. Lu Xiaoyi insisted. I am a young spirit. I have the ability to be reborn. Even if there is danger, I can hold on for a few rounds and not die. Can you? If you're not careful, you will be finished immediately. You will also make this monk unable to report back. Gu Xing did not bend the rules. After all these years of getting along, the two of them could be considered to have appreciated each other. It was rare for them to have similar temperaments, so neither of them was willing to let the other take the risk. Chapter 1779. When Lu Xiaoyi became stubborn, he would never compromise. He turned around and left. Of course I'll settle my own matters. Why are you, a guide, causing trouble here? Who's the master? I'm a master, all right? You're just an assistant. When I become famous in the future, someone will write a biography for me. How should I write this paragraph? Gu Xing was speechless. As expected, swordsmen were all stubborn people. When it came to a battle, they would get excited. No one could stop them. This was also reasonable. In fact, from the moment he opened his mouth to stop him, he knew that the possibility of him going first was not high. All right. Your feathers are more important than a monk's, so you go first. But you have to be careful. The effective range of the meridional divine ray of magnetism is about 30,000 miles in the cosmic void. Considering the environment here, the effective range should be around 50,000 miles. So I'll follow you from 50,000 miles away. If they make any strange moves, you have to hold on for a few breaths. I'll say this in advance. If you're careless and lose your life, I won't avenge you. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. The person who can kill me hasn't been born yet. With his sleeves behind his back, he walked straight ahead. 50,000 miles in such a winding canyon meant that even the naked eye could not see. This was their situation. However, the meridional divine ray of magnetism of the two unfamiliar primordial spirit cultivators could directly pass through. As he walked forward, he had his own judgment about the appearance of the two unfamiliar primordial spirit cultivators here. He hoped that all his worries were in vain. After traveling for 10,000 miles, Gu Xing, who was behind him, could no longer see his silhouette. Even his divine sense had become intermittent due to the intense magnetic storm. He still maintained his unhurried speed. Being too fast or too slow might cause the other party to be on guard. Traveling in the void of the universe, especially in a narrow passage like this, it was extremely impolite to approach someone who was practicing martial arts or hunting treasures rashly. But he couldn't just keep waiting like this, could he? The cultivation of primordial spirit cultivators could take a few years, or even a few decades, or even 100 years. They could not afford to wait. After making another turn, neither Gu Xing nor the two unfamiliar cultivators in front of him could see him. Thus, as if performing a magic trick, the hair on his head fell to the ground, and he took out a monk's robe from his storage ring. At the same time, he held a Buddhist staff in his hand, and the appearance of a young monk was vividly displayed. That was not the end of it. He secretly activated the Tao realm of merit. Relying on his profound strength in merit, coupled with his cultivation base that had taken a step forward, his entire body instantly emitted an aura similar to that of the sun god. To a half-immortal cultivator, this wasn't difficult at all. At the same time, he sped up and rushed forward without hesitation. The two magnetite cultivators had long sensed an aura approaching from the canyon. There were two of them in total. Due to the limitations of his realm, he couldn't distinguish them clearly. He only knew that one of them was standing still while the other was rapidly approaching. He couldn't help but secretly make preparations to attack. They were here to cultivate the proto-magnetic divine light and to wait for someone. In the Yangding Tian, there were many fifth ring cultivators who hated them. The lower the realm, the easier it was to be influenced by hatred. However, in the swordsman class of the Yangding Tian, there were already people who had begun to face this problem. In recent years, there are also some different voices. It was this group of people led by Prince Jinyao. They stood at a higher position and saw further. However, in a realm, to change the perception of blood and tears that were still fresh in the memory of thousands of years ago required a process and time. If time passed, the perception would gradually fade. However, for most people now, there wasn't enough time. They had forgotten the blood debt of their family members. Thus, there were many who had to change, but there were even more who insisted on revenge. The two of them belonged to the core members of the group who insisted on revenge. Through a mysterious channel, they found out that in recent years, a fifth-ring swordsman would be heading to the Yangding Tian. Furthermore, he would be taking this path of no return. Thus, there was a reason for them to wait here. Since they could cultivate and kill enemies, why not? Very few people knew about this path. In this direction, there weren't any large human cultivation realms, so there was no such thing as a trade route. There is also the existence of a large magnetic constellation. Those who made a living in the universe wouldn't be willing to come here and look for trouble. Other people's forbidden land was their heaven. The Yangding Tian had suffered great losses in the previous battle with the fifth ring cultivators. Later on, because of their dishonesty, they were suppressed several times. However, there were always ways to take revenge. There were many ways, and one of them was to cultivate cultivators with unique combat power. For example, the protomagnetic divine light cultivators who had almost cut off their cultivation path. Once the meridional divine light was cultivated, not to mention killing people, it would first obliterate their original realm and abilities. They would become a powerful magnet. The first consequence was to demagnetize themselves. It was equivalent to erasing everything that they had cultivated for thousands of years. Only then would they be able to cultivate the protomagnetic divine light with unparalleled attacks. This was the trump card of the fifth ring cultivators. They had all willingly given up their future to cultivate such a fierce technique. They hadn't even achieved anything in the battle with the fifth ring cultivators. Now, they had to turn enemies into friends? Perhaps the powerful cultivators had their own reasons, but to people like them who had given up their original future and worked hard to cultivate, this was a joke. How could they tolerate it? How could they accept it? At the Yangding Tian, they didn't dare to do anything because of the pressure from the powerful cultivators. However, now that they were out of the Yangding Tian and there was news that the most ruthless fifth ring cultivator, the swordsman, was passing by, there was no need to say anything. It was a natural choice. The two of them were the top cultivators of the meridional divine light at the Yangding Tian. The sun god didn't know how to cultivate because they were still shouldering the future of the Yangding Tian. The Yuaning also didn't know how to cultivate because of the limitations of her realm. Even if she cultivated the divine light, it wouldn't be of much use. There were only the Yin god and the primordial spirit, and they were the only two primordial spirits. After nearly 1,000 years of cultivation, the protomagnetic divine light had become their original body. Now, they could use the swordsman to test their skills. The news was accurate. It was a Buddhist cultivator who had lured the swordsman in and left him for them to deal with. This was in line with their current senses, but the distance was a little far. Even if they cultivated the divine light of proto-magnetic divine light, it could only increase their attack power. In terms of divine sense, they were also limited. Because their realm wasn't high enough, they couldn't even compare to the two intruders. Therefore, they needed to get the swordsman closer before fighting. The Buddhists of the main world were their potential allies. Unfortunately, during the First Fifth Ring War, they were watched too closely by the Fifth Ring cultivators. There were also some who were dragging them down, so they didn't join. However, at least they knew who was their friend and who was their enemy. Due to the lack of time and the inconvenience of traveling through the universe, it was difficult to establish a connection between the two of them and the Buddhist cultivator. However, it didn't matter to them. Two people, a monk and a swordsman, were as different as heaven and earth. Was it difficult to distinguish them? Chapter 1780. The two magnetite cultivators knew that it was impossible for two people to travel in such a canyon at the same time. They had to keep a distance and support each other. There was only one problem. Would the swordsman come first, or would the monk come first? If the monk came first, they would let the monk go and wait for the swordsman to pass. When the swordsman passed, they would follow and attack, forming a pincer attack with the monk. If the swordsman came first, they would have to attack him head-on. It would also be a pincer attack. It was a flawless plan. Even if it was a Xinyuan cultivator whose strength was greatly reduced by the environment, they did not think that it would be difficult. He was just a primordial spirit cultivator. They had been waiting for this day for too long. Yang Ji identified and made a preliminary judgment. It seems like the monk came first. There's a Buddhist aura. It makes sense. The monk led the way, so of course he came first. Yang Ji was very calm. Don't jump to conclusions. The swordsman looks crazy, but he is actually very cunning and has a lot of combat experience. Two factors must be met to prove that he is a monk. First, he must have the cultivation of a great Buddha. Second, the swordsman can't have a pure Buddhist Tao state. If he has a Tao state that is common to Buddhists, and I need to be careful. Yang Ji's words were very reasonable. This was also the biggest help that the mysterious person who brought the news could give them. When a stranger appeared from the last corner, the two of them watched as an unruly and confident monk drifted over in a magnanimous manner. He was a sun god, because the person who brought them the news was afraid that they would be afraid of half-immortals. He did not even mention this level of identity. This caused them to make a serious misjudgment. There was no problem with the Tao state screening. It was a pure merit path. It was definitely not a lie. But Yang Ji still did not forget the last checkpoint. Buddha has 3 treasures and 3 sufferings. Lu Xiaoyi's heart skipped a beat. This was a test. He had always thought that Luo Sutian and Yang Ding would meet the power that attacked him, because these were the 2 places that had the worst relationship with the 5th ring. There was no reason to choose a domain that was related to him just to take him by surprise. There was a threshold between Luo Sutian and Yang Ding. The next threshold could be Fu Shun or Ming Guang. That was why he had been on guard all this time. That was why he had taken the initiative to attack Luo Sutian. Unfortunately, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, that hidden person did not reveal a single trace of himself, even though he had deliberately exposed flaws many times in the Tao Realm competition. He was a person whose suspicions were hard to dispel once they arose. Generally, ambitious and ruthless people were like this. It was also intuition. I would rather betray the entire cultivation world than let the cultivation world betray me. If he couldn't find anyone in Luo Sutian who was hostile to him, then he would look for someone who was friendly to him. In the past 10 days in Luo Su Heaven, he had traveled all over the celestial palaces to make friends. How was that possible? Both sides had suffered countless casualties in a 5-ring battle. How could a single exchange of realms change their impression of each other? That was just the childish conjecture of a mortal writer. These people, even if you lent them 10 taels of silver, They would remember you for the rest of their lives. They were narrow-minded, but hoped that others would be magnanimous. In fact, to be able to reach such an agreement in Luo Su Tian was already a slap to the face of Buddhism in the East Heaven Main world. Under normal circumstances, most of the monks would grit their teeth and bear with it. They would think about how to get back at them in the future. That was why he had been visiting everywhere. He wanted to find those who did not take the usual path but had a good relationship with him. Among the hundreds of monks in Luo Su Tian, Gu Xing was not the only one who behaved abnormally. There were still a few of them. Most of them were habitual, smiling tigers. Those who had the intention to harm him, just wait and see. When Gu Xian opened his mouth at the gathering, Lu Xiaoyi immediately locked him as a suspect. It was just that he did not know if there were any other helpers in Luo Su Tian. Along the way, he had been waiting for this guy to make a move. Until he felt the anomaly in the sky, he judged that this was probably the best place for Gu Xing to make a move. Originally, with his style, why would he have the patience to dawdle with this monk? Outside the universe, if he could capture him alive, he would capture him alive. If he could kill him, he would kill him. Why would it be so troublesome and allow him to choose a place to make a move? But there were two reasons why he was not anxious. First, he really needed someone to lead the way. Second, he was hoping that the real mastermind would appear. After waiting for a while, the mastermind did not appear. Instead, he waited for two bitter and vengeful people to appear. Originally, all of this was just his guess. He was such a suspicious person, but if he was not sure, it would be hard for him to make a move. When he asked about the Een pole, he knew that his guess was right. These two people were very clear about what they were doing. Their goal was clear and their intention was obvious. It was not a coincidence that they were disturbed during their cultivation. They were already prepared. If he answered wrongly, he would immediately be attacked. 3 treasures and 3 hardships? How would he know? It was definitely not the standard answer of Buddhism. Preparing for the worst and not giving up hope. It was just a guess. What if he guessed it right? In a flash, an idea flashed in his mind. If they were talking about Gu Xing's 3 treasures, then he chuckled. The 3 treasures, Meng Tian, Qing Wu, and Xiang Sao? This frivolous person. He even spread this little hobby of mine. This was also a trick. He purposely appeared to be unrestrained and dissatisfied that his secret was exposed. In fact, it was to hide that he did not know the truth about the 3 hardships. At the same time, he quickly approached. As long as the other party made a move, he would immediately approach. This was the only secret to deal with the origin magnet divine light in such an environment. But Yang Ji's performance made him feel at ease. He was still a little impatient. This Yang Ji's state of mind was much worse than his junior brother, Yin Ji. Master quickly passed through. Wait at the 2 bins in front. We will launch a tail attack after the Xianyuan bastard passes through. Master, you don't have to reach out. You just have to prevent him from escaping. Lu Xiaoyi realized that he had passed, but the problem was that he only answered the 3 treasures and not the 3 hardships. There was only one conclusion. In Luo Su Heaven, there were at least 2 people who could be used by the mastermind, and Yang Dingren did not know which one was coming. The swordsman floated by casually and warned, the swordsman behind is also disguised as a monk. You have to be careful not to be fooled by his flowery words. Yang Ji was speechless. Do we look that stupid? There are only 2 people in total. With you here, it is useless no matter what the other one pretends to be. Even if he pretends to be the heavenly Tao. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. I don't mean any harm, but that swordsman is cunning and treacherous. I'm just afraid that you won't notice it. This was also a trick because the real and fake monks would inevitably happen. He couldn't fool them for too long. He only hoped to fool them for a few more breaths so that he could kill the monk a few times in a short period of time. The one who didn't speak was not easy to fool, but this one was a little careless. The origin magnet divine light was the most powerful when used by 2 people. From a technical point of view, if the reckless one took action, the cautious one would have to follow suit. This was the opportunity he needed. Chapter 1781. Fortunately, Gu Ding had followed Lu Xiaoyi after moving about 50,000 miles ahead of him. Everything was under his control. This swordsman would not be able to escape today. The canyon was narrow, and it was difficult to enter or exit. There were magnetic force cultivators blocking the front, and he was intercepting the back. This was a dead end. Someone as experienced as him knew that there was no such thing as an invincible existence in the cultivation world. If the opponent was invincible, it could only mean that you did not find the right fighting method and environment. In this operation, he was not the instigator, but he was the one who proposed the plan. This canyon was the core of the plan. As for communicating with Yang Dingtian, that was someone else's business. The swordsman was a good person, but that was not the reason for him to stop. At this level of cultivation, it was difficult to have a flaw in one's mentality. He was like this, and so was the swordsman. He would not forget about his position just because of a few years of interaction. He had once said that if there was an enemy in the future, he would not hold back. It was just that this opportunity came early. He was not confident that he could defeat the swordsman alone. He did not understand the abilities of a half-immortal. What made him depressed was that since when did a Yang spirit level cultivator begin to be on tenterhooks during a battle? The Xinyuan swordsman was just that evil. He increased his speed as he had a certain understanding of the magnetic force. Although the two swordsmen were only in the primordial soul realm, even a great Buddha like him would find it difficult to withstand the magnetic force released in such an environment. No matter how strong the swordsman was, if he did not defend himself, he would most likely be severely injured. He had to be faster to prevent the swordsman from escaping. The plan was very meticulous. The fatal blow required 2 Yang Dingids to complete. If they didn't die, he would have to continue the chase. As for the metamagnet divine light, other than a few earth-shattering attacks, the rest were not worth mentioning. As he moved, he felt a little strange. There was no abnormal magnetic field fluctuation that was unique to the meridional magnetic force in front of him. It was as if he had entered a forbidden space. Sensing carefully, it seemed that the swordsman had passed by the 2 Yang Dingtian. What was going on? It was impossible to form a pincer attack in such a battlefield. Did the Yang Dingtian change his mind and give up on the mission? Gu Xing's heart was filled with resentment. He hated people who were hesitant. Yang Ding cultivators were like this. They looked like they were unconvinced and indignant, but they were actually cowardly on the inside. Time was short, so he couldn't think of any other possibilities. Tens of thousands of miles was just a matter of a few breaths for a great Buddha like him. As soon as they reached the last bend, the magnetic field in front of them suddenly changed. Knowing that something was wrong, how could they make it in time if they wanted to retreat? The sharpest aspect of the meridian origin magnet divine light was its unparalleled speed. This was the most unfathomable speed in the world of cultivation. It was as famous as thunder, and it was not even on the same level as flying swords. The moment you saw it, you would be hit. Facing the all-out attack of the 2 Yang peak cultivators, Gu Xing only felt that his Buddha golden body seemed to have been poisoned by the bone-softening powder. His spirit was in a trance, and his consciousness was unclear. There were too many reasons why a great Buddha at the level of Yang spirit could lose control for a short time with just one blow, such as environmental enhancement, environmental suppression, 2-person joint attack, unintentional attack, and so on. Gu Xing defended against the swordsman's close-range attack, but in the end, he was met with a long-range attack. Before he could fully recover, the Yang Ding dual cultivator's second attack shot over. This time, Gu Xing was really lucky. He was swept into ashes by the divine origin magnet divine light. The difference between Yang spirit and primordial spirit was mainly in rebirth. In terms of combat strength, the difference was limited, but there was more room for error. Gu Xing's rebirth made Yingji immediately feel that something was wrong. The news said that the swordsman was in the primordial spirit realm. How did he become a Yang spirit? Moreover, the signs of rebirth were very clear. 2 monks, which one was real? Which one was fake? Lu Xiaoyi pounced from the side, and in the Karma Tao realm, a fist smashed down like a mountain. In this environment, fists were more useful than flying swords. Hurry up. This person is practicing a special technique, so the number of rebirths is limited. Yang Ding and Yin Ji were a little confused. Yin Ji wanted to take a closer look, but Yang Ji was like a raging fire. How could he let this opportunity go to waste? The two of them wouldn't be able to do anything if they managed to escape into the void outside. At this moment, it reflected the effect of the previous sentence. Yang Ji rushed for time and attacked again. Yin Ji had no choice but to follow because of his martial arts. Beside him, there was also the fierce Lu Xiaoyi. Gu Xing did not expect that he would become everyone's enemy. The reason was obvious. The disguise of the fake monk in front of him explained everything. He had been seen through. Thus he laughed. Swordsman turned into a monk? If news of Lord Lu's appearance today were to spread, how would you cherish your feathers? You're a disgrace to all sword cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi also laughed. Little Lu, do you think that after becoming a half-deity, you can do whatever you want in the origin world? You think you can rely on a secret technique to be reborn and pretend to be a yang spirit? Cherishing your feathers is right, but the prerequisite is that you are an eagle. If you're a duster, I don't think there is any need. Amidst the laughter, Gu Xing was beheaded for the second time. But at this time, the Yangding duo felt that something was wrong. Although they were not sure which was real and which was fake, their hands had unconsciously slowed down. A simple action had turned out like this. It was very embarrassing. The two's divine senses touched and reached a tacit understanding. First, take a look and prepare to intercept. For this reason, the two split into east and west, and each took one outside the range of the two monks fighting each other. It was a little dangerous for one person to block one end, but now it was a necessary choice. It was better than the fake monk running away. After the second rebirth, there was no longer the help of Lu Xiaoyi, but Lu Xiaoyi had already gotten what he needed. After 2 rebirths, the past and future were revealed. Why did they not fight him in Luo Su Tian? It was because they were worried that he would see through their roots. With the hidden relationship between the East Heaven main world and the Hengi region, how could they not send someone to contact each other? Because they were worried about Lu Xiaoyi's familiarity with the Hengi region. They could only hide. In this place, there was no need to worry about the swordsman's flying sword. But Gu Xing found that he was still in great danger. This was because the swordsman's close combat was even scarier than the flying sword. After decades of interaction with Shi Zhao and the other senior brothers, although he did not learn their harmonious spirit technique, the improvement in his close combat skills was obvious. Gu Xing found that the environment he chose not only limited the swordsman's flying sword, but it also limited his escape. In this place, his rebirth location was very limited. He could not effectively distance himself, and he could not avoid the swordsman's continuous attacks. His only hope was to be reborn a few more times. Then, Yang Ding and the other idiots would be able to see the truth. As long as they made a move, he would be able to catch his breath. The swordsman's fiery invasion was not limited to the flying sword. Without the flying sword, it was equally terrifying with just his fists. Chapter 1782. 2 rebirths were enough for Lu Xiaoyi to see a lot of things. After establishing his superego, his understanding of the past and the future had reached a new height. It was far from the time when he was still confused in the Sword Dao tablet. At that time, he still couldn't understand the mystery behind the senior's severing 3 lives, but he had been improving. This was something that was naturally formed as his realm increased and his understanding of the Dao deepened. Gu Xing didn't survive the 3rd time, and Yang Dingtian and Yin Yang didn't have the chance to determine the truth. Or rather, they already had the chance, but it was already over. Lu Xiaoyi perfectly fulfilled his promise to Gu Xing. Once they fought, he would give it his all. He didn't care about the close conversations they had before, just like how Gu Xing didn't hesitate to lead him into the canyon. For someone who used friendship as a means, this was the best ending for him. Looking at Gu Xing's incredulous eyes that were gradually dimming, Lu Xiaoyi smiled warmly. You shouldn't have shown Sanbao to outsiders. Some people just like widows. Everything was clear now. It all depended on the sword light that cut off Gu Xing's past and future. In anger, a ray of divine metamagnet ray suddenly fell and landed on the swordsman, who was still feeling complacent and enjoying the thrill of victory. But it didn't seem to produce any results. Lu Xiaoyi looked at the two coldly and opened his mouth. Meridional metamagnet ray can't solve everything. Yang Dingtian, you want to rely on some secret technique to change your situation? You are too narrow-minded. If you want to change Yang Dingtian's future, you need to be broad-minded. He leaped and instantly landed beside Yang Dingtian. He didn't care about the divine metamagnet ray on his body and raised his sword. Yang Dingtian fell. When the so-called secret technique that they relied on failed, cultivators like them who practiced metamagnet ray alone were actually very weak. This was because they had already lost many things that cultivators relied on to survive. Cultivation was ultimately a systematic process. Yang Dingtian was disheartened. He didn't expect that a certain death situation would be completely reversed. He didn't even know where the problem was. But when he saw how his opponent resolved the divine metamagnet ray, he realized that they had never truly understood this swordsman. There was no sure kill technique in the cultivation world. There never was. The more powerful and unsolvable a secret technique was, the easier it would be to crack it. Instead, it was the simplest and most practical moves like a punch or a sword that required extra effort. What was the weakness of the divine metamagnet light? Since it was something created in the universe, it naturally had its own mechanism and essence. It was one of the countless mysteries of the universe. If one wanted to decipher it, one had to start from the essence of the universe. What was the essence of a universe? Starting from the five ties, from incorporeal to corporeal, from incorporeal to corporeal, until there was light and life. This was the first time Lu Xiaoyi had used the power of the five Grandao realm in battle, and it was also something that he had been secretly pondering after following Gu Xing all this time. Otherwise, how could he have known that this was a trap and still jumped into it? He didn't have any heroic plots. Extreme seemed to have realized something, but it was too late. He asked himself, if he knew how terrifying this swordsman was, would he still come? The answer was yes. The fault lies with that stupid monk. The main purpose of the swordsman series of tricks was to kill the monk first. If the three of them worked together, the swordsman wouldn't have been able to set up a 5 Grandao realm defense around him. This kind of defense was effective against the divine metamagnet light, but it was useless against the spiritual consciousness of the Buddhists. Unfortunately, the monk was a guide, but he didn't know that everything he did was under the swordsman's observation. I want to know who ordered you to come here, and even to mix with the Buddhists. I hope this isn't an insult to you, but you must know that this is very important to Yang Dingtian. Not only will you protect the realm, but you will also protect yourself. Who knows, you might even be able to make a comeback in the future. Why not? Extreme closed his eyes. He knew why the swordsman killed Extreme Yang first. It was because he believed that those who were scheming would cherish their lives more. Was that so? When he opened his eyes again, he felt as if his entire body was in a relaxed state. No need. The path ahead is already cut off, so what's the point of keeping this body? If I don't have this body, what does the future of the realm have to do with me? With no thoughts in his heart, he was fearless. Extreme entered a rare state of selflessness. He no longer cared about his own life, nor did he consider the future of the domain as a burden. Thus, he was able to unleash his full strength. This was an attack to his heart's content. This was the strongest output of the divine metamagnet light in the current environment. It was everything he had comprehended in the past 1,000 years. And it was also an improvisation in this situation, because there might not be a next time. However, when the divine metamagnet light couldn't break through the transformation of the universe's essence, when the divine metamagnet light was stripped layer by layer by layer by Lu Xiaoyi's 5 Grandao realm defense, it went from being material to being formless, from being visible to being invisible, from being full of life to being completely empty, without light. The outcome was also destined. In every realm, in every era, there were such tragic heroes. They were good men, good teachers, good disciples, good fathers, good followers, and were loyal to their home planet. In order to protect it, they were willing to give up their lives. The only problem was that they couldn't look at history, development, and the future from a higher vantage point. Human history was a contradictory, evolutionary process. Because of war, the survival of the fittest was promoted, but because of tolerance, they became the #1 race in the universe. Thinking about it carefully, if every human was stubborn like this, like some demon beast that relied on their instincts, then it was undeniable that the human race should have gone extinct long ago. History should not be forgotten. History must also be forgotten. It was not right to forget hatred, and it was also not right to live in hatred forever. It was really hard to judge who was right and who was wrong. As a cultivator, Lu Xiaoyi gave him the highest treatment, allowing him to display all that he had learned in his life without holding back and doing his best. Until extreme, Yin couldn't think of any other means to attack. He turned his hand and destroyed his own spirit. Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. At least he was better than that cunning monk, just that his head was a little square, jumping into the long river of history, yet going against the flow. Did you think you were a carp leaping over the dragon's gate? This battle wasn't as easy as it seemed. If these three people could join hands and fight in close combat, with Yang Ding and extreme Yin's divine light, his chances of winning wouldn't be more than 50%. This was because he wasn't familiar with the three-dimensional layer defense of the 5 ether. It was just an idea that came to him when he was about to come here. His goal was to create a space for himself to use freely in the strong magnetic field. In fact, his research was a failure because the space he created was very limited. It wasn't enough for him to use his flying sword in it. It was only slightly better than close combat. However, it had a miraculous effect in defending against the metamagnet divine light. Of course, this was under the condition that no one disturb him. If the monk was there to restrain him, his childish and crude 5 ether defense system wouldn't be able to take shape, and there wouldn't be a future. This was a victory with a little bit of luck. The monk died because of his carelessness. He treated everyone else as fools. Yang Ding and Extreme, Yin lost in terms of strength. It was also a mistake to rely too much on the environment. Chapter 1783. After dealing with the aftermath, Lu Xiaoyi continued to advance along the canyon. He never considered what would happen to the Alliance if he killed these 3 people. There was no need for that. He couldn't say that they could beat him up unscrupulously just because he was in cahoots with them. A force, a domain, would definitely have mainstream and minority voices. It would never be possible for everyone to happily join the 5th ring. This was the complexity of humans. Regardless of whether it was true or not, he would only treat these 3 as non-mainstream. Either they were individuals or they were deceived by others. If he linked these accidents to the domain, then he wouldn't have to do anything. There was also trouble. There should be a hidden hung river cultivator in Luo Sutian, but he didn't know who the 3 distresses referred to. He didn't have the chance to investigate. The news of the 5th ring joining forces with the upper worlds to attack Hung River was leaked. In fact, he wasn't surprised. The universe was so big and involved so many domains. People's hearts were unpredictable. How could it be completely hidden? The only thing he wasn't sure of was how many domains the 5th ring pulled together. Regarding this, Lu Xiaoyi only revealed the truth to the 5th ring, Zhou 8 great sect leaders, and Heaven's Choice Taoist and Buddha. As for the rest, he was vague. These 3 sects were also the ones that Lu Xiaoyi judged to be able to walk together with the 5th ring. This was also Qing Xin's judgment. They had been cultivating in Zhou Xian for a long time and had a deep understanding of it. Heaven's Choice Continent was also the place where the Crow ancestor built the Sword Dao tablet. There were people that could be roped in. In the end, it would still be a head-on expedition. He could also understand Luo Sutian's decision to let him clash with the Hung River cultivators regardless of life or death. After notifying the place, Lu Xiaoyi's usefulness was over. As for the future Hung River War, how much would it matter if there was one less person? It was just a coincidental cooperation. How could he expect the Buddhists to be loyal to him? He didn't want to waste too much time on Yangding. It was a blind domain. He didn't want her to bring the news. Recently, something big happened to Heaven's Choice. Regarding the quota of the Tao Tablet, the people of Zhou Xian and Heaven's Choice had some conflicts. Originally, such rumors had never stopped, but this time, it was especially big, especially after a cultivator with the surname Lin revealed that there were people from Zhou Xian who got in through the back door and squeezed out the local cultivators' spots. The cultivators of the Heaven's Choice were all fired up. In this sort of environment, the relationship between the two sides of the Heaven's Choice continent became very unfriendly. Even the upper echelons found it difficult to completely control the situation. After all, this involved the pursuit of the great Tao of the lower echelons. Time became increasingly tight. The Heaven's Choice people were already dissatisfied with outsiders interfering with the Tao tablets. Using this opportunity, they decided to erupt with anger. A few Zhou Xian cultivators were involved in this. One was from Qingwei, one was from Yuanshu, and one was from the Golden Court. It was said that they were detained. They wanted to dig out the truth behind this, but there was a lot of resistance. Thus, they started to fight within Heaven's Choice. However, it was impossible for the higher realms of Zhou Xian to ignore this matter. Thus, they sent people over to question them. After a while, both sides couldn't suppress their anger, and there were signs of a second realm war. In view of the fact that the first war was a waste of manpower and resources, and the expedition was fruitless, both sides agreed to control their differences within a certain range. Each side sent dozens of sun spirits to settle this outside. This was considered a more sensible solution. Under this kind of situation, the atmosphere suddenly became tense. The Heaven's Choice continent tightened the control of entry and exit, while Zhou Xian strictly controlled the heaven and earth chessboard, guarding against each other. When the pass was raised, the trade route between the two realms was cut off. Only then did everyone suddenly realize that the relationship between the two sides was very deep. Some people began to regret haggling over the quota of the Tao Tablet. However, how could the fire that was stirred up be so easily extinguished? If they didn't fight, they wouldn't be able to resolve it. In the cultivation world, disputes were caused by small matters. In fact, it was the accumulation of contradictions over time. In the eyes of outsiders, it was very normal. After all, there was the acne of the first battle of Zhou Xian. Moreover, the problem of the Tao Tablet did exist. Both sides had the desire to vent their emotions. On a mountain peak, three cultivators looked at each other gloomily. They had just been released. The place where they were detained wasn't some other place, but the various innate Tao tablets. Over the years, they had seen several Tao tablets for free, and they were accompanied by specialized sun spirits. They had no choice but to go. They had long sensed that something was wrong, but they didn't know where it came from. An old Taoist floated over with a smile. It was Sun Spirit Qingfeng, who had followed them for more than 10 years. His name was everywhere in the cultivation world, just like Wang Li, Li Yong, and so on in the mortal world. Have you all thought through? Where do you want to go for the next Tao tablet? You asked for it. I will definitely fulfill it. Slug couldn't help but ask, Senior, what the hell are you doing? You still want to do this in this kind of situation? Detaining us in a disguised way. Let me guess, could it be related to that damned Lu Xiaoyi? Huazue also insisted, if you don't tell us, we won't go to any of the Tao tablets. We'll just walk around the Heaven's Choice continent, unless you use force. Qingfeng looked at the expressions of the three people and knew that if he didn't say anything, there would be changes. He couldn't keep these people in the dark. It wasn't realistic either. They were all primordial spirits, and there were many strange things that ordinary cultivators couldn't see through. However, as the three of them were being used, it was better for them to reveal a little of the truth. The Heaven's Choice sun spirits had already set off. The curtains were slowly opening, and some things could be said. You guessed right and wrong. It is indeed related to your friends. However, as for the specific restrictions on your movements, this was a joint decision of the higher-ups of Heaven's Choice and Joseon. Here are the communication talismans of your respective sections. You can take a look. The three of them each took out their talismans. After glancing at them, they were a little disheartened. It was indeed from their sections. There was no extra words, just that everything should be done according to Heaven's Choice's wishes. Slug's expression changed. We also know that there must be some inside story. However, the three of us are primordial spirit perfected lords after all. We aren't people who don't know the severity of things. What can't we say? Are you afraid that we'll leak it out? It's really depressing to be kept in the dark like this. We can't even cultivate normally. Qing Feng's expression was serious. Today's words came out of my mouth and entered your ears. If even half a word is leaked, I don't need to look for trouble with you. Your sex won't let you off easily. The three of them knew that this was a serious matter, so they all nodded. Qing Feng then said, I can only say what you can hear. It's the purpose of your friend, fellow Taoist Liu, coming to Heaven's Choice. I won't say the destination, but Heaven's Choice and Joseon Sun Spirits are both on the expedition. Heaven's Choice is a sieve, and Joseon is a vegetable market. A large number of Sun Spirits have disappeared. This can't be hidden from others. In order to prevent the news from leaking, we set up such a smokescreen. Firstly, it's to cover for the Sun Spirits expedition. Secondly, the problem of the Tao tablets also needs to be alleviated. However, it's tiring the few of you, but you don't lose out. You can travel around the innate Tao tablets for free. You don't have to pay a single spirit stone. This old man also has to accompany you to answer your questions. Slug cursed. This bastard, he's hiding such a good thing. We've been friends for nothing. We're no longer friends. We can't have this friend anymore. Chapter 1784. Hengi Sector, Sun God Temple. Sun God Temple was the largest and most honorable temple in Hengi Sector. Today was the day of the holy festival. Outside the temple, there was a sea of people. There were devout believers everywhere, bustling and overcrowded. One of Hengi Sector's characteristics was that it was famous for its many festivals. They were all related to religion and were also the source of Hengi Sector's cultivators' power. Therefore, even the Honorable Sun God Temple did not stop ordinary believers from entering. It only limited the flow to prevent people from stepping on it. The people could only enter the periphery of the Sun God Temple. In the depths of the temple, there was another group of people's festival, a real festival. The last festival like this was 300 years ago. An outstanding cultivator of Hengi Sector took that step. This time, another high priest was invited by the upper realm and took a step forward, becoming another pillar of Hengi Sector in the half-immortal level. In an unspeakable place, Hengi Sector sent another talent to the universe's cultivation world. Yaber Khan. This was his former name. He was a pillar of Hengi Sector along with Amir Khan. Under such circumstances, he finally took a step forward, making the people of Hengi Sector happy. However, as the main character, he did not receive everyone's blessings in the temple. Instead, he sat opposite Amir Khan in a secret room. Although he was not frowning, there was not much joy either. I didn't want to go to the upper realm. After I leave, there will be one less person who can protect the sector in Hengi Sector. It's not that I'm insecure, but the internal strife in Hengi Sector is serious. There are many factions and reforms are difficult. I'm afraid that after I leave, you'll be alone. However, time waits for no man. I have to take this step. If I don't take it now, I won't be able to take it in the future. Yaber Khan's expression was serious. What he said was the truth. The two of them had known each other for thousands of years. They were both top young god high priests of Hengi Sector. It was rare for them to see the same thing. They both wanted to change the Hengi Sector. The two of them, one in the dark and one in the light, were the pillars of Hengi Sector's reformists. However, once he went to the upper realm, only Amir Khan would be left. The two of them sighed. In fact, it was not only Yaber Khan. Amir Khan also had this concern. In the current situation of the universe, going to the upper realm might not be a good thing. Of course, this was a good thing for the individual. Amir Khan said solemnly, "The situation in the universe is gradually becoming clearer. What we did in the last Fifth Ring War has been exposed. The Fifth Ring people will not be restrained because they have no evidence. Their habit has always been to take revenge. Regarding this matter, since it had already happened, there was no need to mention it again. We didn't stop them back then, but that doesn't mean we don't have to take responsibility now. That's why you came to the upper realm at the right time." Abraham was confused. "What do you mean?" Amir Khan explained. "You've been focusing on breaking through recently, so you don't know much about the changes in the outside world. There was a rumor that the abnormal upper realm cultivators of the interior realm might get the chance to descend to the lower realm when the 13th Great Path collapsed. The way of heaven is just. I think such an opportunity will also happen to those of the exterior realm." Abraham seemed to understand something. "What do you mean?" Amir Khan said solemnly. "The Fifth Ring intends to take revenge on Hung River and contact the mainstream Taoists and Buddhists. He was the backer of the group of evildoers who had ascended to the interior heaven. At that time, he might even directly attack my Hung River from the interior realm. This is an important window of time. Various sources of information are coming in to verify this speculation. There's more than a 70% chance. We'll contact various strong reinforcements below and rely on the Hung River region to prepare for this battle. As for you, your most important task is to immediately head to the exterior realm and find that unworthy disciple of mine. I hope he can lead a group of exterior realm half-immortals so that we can compete with the Fifth Ring." Abraham understood. In these few hundred years of breaking through, he knew very little about the changes in the outside world. "You mean, like me who ascended normally can't descend even if the 13th Great Path collapsed, but those who can reach the exterior realm with their vital spirit can? That's a good idea. I just don't know if there are many of such people in the exterior realm. Are they willing to be used by me?" Amir Khan smiled. "Senior brother, don't worry. Throughout history, the number of cultivators in the exterior realm was dozens of times more than that in the interior realm. Under such circumstances, there would be many cultivators like my disciple, whose orthodoxy was peculiar, who were not recognized by the interior realm and could only enter the exterior realm. You don't have to worry about them being indifferent and looking on coldly. When the Great Path collapses, those interior realm monsters think that the Great Path is their meal. Why? You. And I may not feel it deeply, but will those monsters who reach the exterior realm one step ahead of us take this lying down? When the Great Path is fighting, who will give it up? Are the interior realm masters their biological sons? Are the exterior realm masters illegitimate sons? Therefore, there must be many who are willing to descend. Even if it's not to help the Hung River region, but for their own Great Path, no one will back down after killing those arrogant interior realm masters. If we don't fight now, where can we find such a good opportunity?" Yaberkin frowned. "Are you sure about the timing?" Amir Khan sighed. "The news doesn't come directly to me. Our position in the Hung River region should not be related to the messy orthodoxies outside. But I heard from the other high priests that they have a lot of friends in the universe. I personally think it's credible. The changes in the universe have always been closely related to the collapse of the Great Path. The collapse of the Great Path has its own rules. And one thing is very certain. The half-immortals from places like the interior and exterior realm masters will eventually come to the main world. They can't be kept captive up there forever. It's only a matter of time. However, it was very likely that those monstrous geniuses who emerged would die first. If we don't take precautions, we will suffer a big loss in this regard. As for the people in the main world, we have the Hung River region to rely on, so we don't have to fear them. Forces like the Fifth Ring are far away and difficult to cross. How can they send all their troops? They're also at odds with the Eastern Heaven Buddhist sect and are wary of each other. So, most likely, only some of the top masters will come. We can't beat them in the Yang spirit level. This is a fact. But we can make up for it in the Yin spirit, primordial spirit. How bad can it be? Abraham nodded. In the Hung River region, he was the only friend he could talk to. You have to be careful. Don't pull in Zerg, Wingman, or any other messy races like last time. You have to persuade them. The reason why the Hung River region has come to this point is because we can't distinguish between good and bad people last time. As a result, we angered some forces, and they think we have already left the scope of human orthodoxies fighting. I think that even if we don't pull in people, as long as we persist, as long as we cause a big disturbance in the universe, there will naturally be people who will come out to mediate. But if we pull in a few more groups of bugs, we will be beyond saving. Chapter 1785. Yongding originally had the heaven and earth great membrane, but it was gone now because it was torn apart by the fifth ring. Due to their dishonest attitude, they were not allowed to recover. To be honest, it was a little overbearing. Although the Yongding world strength was not comparable to the fifth ring world, it was still very strong compared to other human cultivation worlds. Therefore, it was unlikely that there would be any external disturbances. Yongding's countermeasure was to build a large heaven palace to protect him. It was like the moon on Earth in his previous life. After thousands of years of construction, it was already quite large. Other than needing time to polish the details, it also had other wonderful uses. At this point, Yongdingren had roughly understood the restrictions of the heaven and earth great membrane. An open sky was more conducive for cultivators to grow more freely. The Heavenly Palace's name was Yong Qiao Heavenly Palace. He had arrived at the right time. When he arrived, a grand event was being held here. Cultivators and guests had gathered here. Although it was heavily suppressed by the fifth ring, Yongding was still a regional central cultivation planet in this region. There were many subsidiary planets around it, and they looked up to it. Unlike Luo Sutian Space, which was located in a remote area, Yongding Space was located in the mainstream sea route of the mainstream cultivation world. There were many cultivation planets around it, and it was an area where human cultivation civilization was very developed. It was because of this that the fifth ring world attacked it. However, Yongding was unable to swallow his anger in front of so many people. There were many cultivators passing by, and Lu Xiaoyi had already mixed in with them. Of course, his monk robes had long been changed, and even his hair was brand new. He followed the flow of people coming in and out, quietly observing outside Yongxiao Heavenly Palace. After losing the heaven and earth great membrane, Yongdingren had obviously adapted to this kind of unobstructed domain mode. He did not rashly enter the Yong Qiao Heaven Palace. Although it seemed that there was no qualification check there, he found 3 merchant cultivators outside the Heaven Palace. In the universe's cultivation world, most of the cultivators were half merchant and half cultivators. While improving themselves in the void, they would also do some business to supplement their family's finances and fill the financial hole caused by the upper realm. However, there were also a small number of cultivators who were specialized merchants. Their main goal was to earn spirit machines, and their secondary goal was to cultivate. Generally, sects and clans specialized in merchants. While they worked hard for the organization behind them, they also wanted to obtain a higher starting point for their descendants. Merchants are relatively talkative and not that aloof. They were the best people to ask for information. Seeing Lu Xiaoyi come over, the Yin God merchants stopped talking. Merchants had their own rules and business secrets, such as what was good for the realm, what was good for business, etc. For a stranger to suddenly come over like this, they were not welcomed. They were merchants, not donors. Lu Xiaoyi also realized that it was inappropriate, but since he was already here, he could only be thick-skinned. I'm very sorry to disturb you from getting rich. I've traveled far and wide, and there are many things that I don't understand that I would like to ask. If I offend you, please forgive me. 2 of the 3 merchants were impatient. Fortunately, they had finished their business, and they were just talking about their feelings after a long separation. This cultivator who came over was not weak, and they were not to be offended. However, they were from a sect, and they were not afraid of anything. Thus, they excused themselves and left. Fortunately, there was still one person who was willing to talk. Lu Xiaoyi did not just open his mouth. Just like in his previous life, when you went to a foreign place, it was more convenient to buy a pack of cigarettes before asking the boss for directions. It was human nature. Taking out some treasures, these things were meaningless to him. However, not everyone had the same thinking. These things were all picked up from the void of the universe. How much are they worth? The remaining merchant's eyebrows twitched. Picked up? He had traveled through the void of the universe every day, and he had never picked up a single item. He had some misgivings in his heart, and he had a good deal to do. It was obvious that this was a disguised way of spending money to get information. He liked such sensible people, and he would not let them do things for free. After negotiating a price, he happily kept the treasures in his ring. What do you want to know? I've been doing business near the Yangding for thousands of years. Hee, I know everything that I should know, and I also know some things that I should not know. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. It was all just a businessman's nonsense. If he had asked something sensitive, this guy would have sold him out in the blink of an eye. Nothing special. I just came to the Yangding, and I want to know what is going on here. If I want to travel to the domain, what restrictions do I need? The merchant smiled. This was a traveling cultivator who came to the Yangding for the first time. It was easy to get rid of him. However, as a merchant, he believed in equivalent exchange. If he received benefits, he had to give something in return. This was his professional ethics. The gathering of the Yangqiao domain is a new thing in the Yangding domain. It is probably because the Yangqiao Celestial Palace was established less than 1,000 years ago. However, because of the environment, it has become a grand event in the Yangding cultivation world. There is no specific time for it to be held, and everything is decided by the heavens. The Yangding is the Yangding. Since the formation of the domain, the Yang energy here has been abnormally abundant. This also caused the Yangding cultivation technique to lean towards the pure Yang. Therefore, although it is a domain, there are not many schools of thought here. This is also due to the environment. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. The environment not only affected the cultivation technique, but it also affected one's personality. Therefore, it was hard to say whether it was right or wrong for the Yangding and the fifth ring to be at odds with each other for thousands of years. The merchant continued. The universe is constant, and yin and yang are in harmony. This is the principle of the heavenly Tao. Solitary yin does not give birth. Solitary yang does not grow. Therefore, heaven and earth are compatible with yin and yang. The sun on top of the Yang heavenly palace was able to exist for a long time, and all living things were able to flourish. It was all because of the satellite under the Yang Qiao heavenly palace. They formed mutual roots and grew together, relying on each other to survive. However, thousands of years ago, the Tao collapsed, and the universe changed. There was a change in yin and yang between heaven and earth. This change also occurred between the Yangding and the Yangqiao. Until thousands of years ago, when the great membrane of heaven and earth was broken, the Yangqiao Celestial Palace was built on the Yangqiao Celestial Palace. To outsiders, it was to help defend the Yangding. In fact, the real intention was to harmonize the yin and yang relationship between the Yangding and the Yangqiao celestial bodies. Outsiders might not know about this, but it is no longer a secret to the Yangding cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. The Tao collapsed, the universe changed, and the celestial phenomenon became unstable. This is not an exception in the universe. As the change of the era approaches, there will be more and more such changes, and they will become more and more intense. However, in the Yangding sky region, such changes seem to have come earlier. I think the strong magnetic celestial phenomenon outside the domain was also formed thousands of years ago. In addition to Yangding's own star. Sai, it is an eventful time. The merchant nodded repeatedly. My friend is right. There will always be changes sooner or later. I, the Yangding, have created a precedent in this aspect. I wonder if it is a blessing or a curse. Blessing referred to the changes that came earlier. Yangding still had time to think of countermeasures. Curse. If he couldn't adjust such changes to develop in a positive direction, this place would probably become the domain where the first batch of cultivators would have to retreat. Chapter 1786. Lu Xiaoyi chose to say something nice. After all, the changes in the star fields, yin yang and five elements, not only affected cultivators, but also countless ordinary people. It affected the harvest of the land, the direction of the mountains and rivers, and the changes in the environment. No matter which world it was, these were problems that cultivators had to consider first. There are so many capable people, and there are still thousands of years left. It will definitely get better, right? Otherwise, how can we cultivators face our elders in our hometown? These words were pleasing to the ears, and the businessman was worried. That's right. After so many years, ever since the disharmony between yin and yang appeared, Yang Dingtian, started to build a sky palace on Yangqiao. To the outside world, it was a precaution, but in fact, it was just to stabilize people's hearts. The real purpose was to find out how to use yin and yang in the sky palace. My friend, you must have some understanding of the situation in the universe. To put it more deeply, if it wasn't for the problem with Yang Dingtian's place of residence, Yang Dingtian's cultivators might have participated in the last universe war. Now, it seems that the situation would have been worse if I had really participated in it. Who knows? Lu Xiaoyi laughed. So this was the main reason why Yang Dingtian didn't participate in the first universe war. He hit it well enough. In my opinion, there are more benefits. Natural disasters and man-made disasters, which is more difficult to deal with. Others say natural disasters, but I'm more afraid of man-made disasters. Natural disasters may not cause man-made disasters, but man-made disasters will definitely cause natural disasters. The businessman nodded. Yes, isn't it good for everyone to cultivate, live, and do business? Do we have to kill each other? Look at the changes in the heavenly Tao. I heard that a fifth ring senior swordsman poked a big hole in the sky, and in the end, the entire universe fell. Don't you think this person is immoral? Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly and couldn't answer. He couldn't tell him that this senior swordsman was cultivating morality, right? Yang Dingtian and Yang Xiao are yin and yang. If you want to adjust them, you can only start with Yang Xiao. Because of the size of the virtual body, you can use a small force to push a large force. That's why it's so wonderful. Lu Xiaoyi understood that this was the right thing to do. Two celestial bodies were yin and yang. The main celestial body was huge, and the satellite was only a few columns long. If he started from a yang top, he could easily destroy the Yang Qiao satellite sky palace. That would be the real tragedy. Take the internal changes of the cultivation world as an example. In fact, droughts, floods, and natural disasters were secondary. They were the most basic and minor problems. Just like a small cold in the human body, it might be cured after a few days of runny nose. However, this kind of imbalance between yin and yang was a major problem. It was equivalent to a problem with the internal organs of the human body. It was impossible to ignore it and needed to be treated in various ways. Otherwise, as the universe changed more and more, who knew if this kind of imbalance between yin and yang could be corrected on its own? The merchant was also very worried. In the past 1,000 years, countless powerful experts have used their methods in Yangqiao Heavenly Palace, but the results were minimal. Not only were the Yangding cultivators helpless, but even the virtuous cultivators from the outside were also helpless. Therefore, whenever the yin and yang of Yang Top and Yang Xiao clashed with each other, a large number of cultivators would gather in the Sky Palace to provide assistance in adjusting yin and yang. Lu Xiaoyi was puzzled. The power of a domain has all kinds of Tao states. As far as I know, the Yang Top belongs to a big domain in the universe. There are many Yang gods, and the Tao states are profound. Can't you find someone who can balance yin and yang? The merchant smiled bitterly. The Yang Top is a big domain, and there are many Yang gods. However, because the yang energy in the domain is too strong, the direction of the Tao states is relatively simple. In fact, there are not many flowers blooming like other domains. The main focus is on the yin and yang and the five elements. However, after 1,000 years in adjusting the yin and yang of the domain, we found that it is very difficult to start with just the yin and yang and the five elements. The problem with yang top and yang qiao has a deeper reason. Our guess is that it involves an even more ancient problem with the nature of the universe. My friend, you should know that when it comes to adjusting the Tao states, the cooperation of many people is not as good as one person. However, it is very difficult to find a cultivator who is proficient in the nature of the universe. Not to mention finding such a person, even finding a few who are proficient in the five elements of chaos is difficult. Lu Xiaoyi's heart moved. It is very difficult. The five elements are too abstract. Nowadays, cultivators pursue results, and very few people study these Tao states. The merchant was slightly regretful. In fact, it is not that there is no such thing. Just a few years ago, an unfamiliar cultivator came. He called himself the Fifth Prince and recommended himself to adjust yin and yang for yang top. At first, we did not believe it, but after a few years, under this person's adjustment, yang top and yang qiao's yin and yang roots changed greatly. We thought that this was a gift from the heavens, and that the heavens would not destroy yang top. However, we did not expect that just a few years ago, this person accidentally lost his patience when adjusting yin and yang, causing the yin and yang to backfire. He died on the spot in the yin eye, and not even his bones were left. It is a pity that such a prodigy of a generation ended up like this because of me, yang top. After that, we were unable to investigate his background, and we could not even repay him. Lu Xiaoyi was very curious as he listened. He knew very well what the merchant meant. It was rare to find someone who was proficient in the five elements. Not to mention the five elements. Even people who were proficient in the first element were rare. Hence, during the adjustment of yin and yang, the death of such a person made yang top very sad. However, a foreign cultivator sacrificed his life for a foreign world. Why did this sound like a novel? Why do I feel so touched when I hear it? Is there love in the cultivation world again? The merchant was a little dissatisfied. There are always people with morals and selflessness. If we can't do it, it doesn't mean that others can't. Although this person was only at the yin god realm, his Tao state was vast. I don't know how he comprehended it. It is a pity. His cultivation was still too low, and he might have been too anxious for success, so Lu Xiaoyi interrupted him. Did all of you witness the death of the philanthropist with your own eyes? The merchant was a little embarrassed. How could I get close? The adjustment of yin and yang is a big matter. Only those with a certain status and sufficient ability can get close to the core of the Heaven Palace. Although I didn't see it, those who were closest should have seen it, right? The disappearance of the celestial phenomenon isn't fake. My friend, this habit of yours isn't good. You are too suspicious. Lu Xiaoyi's attitude was very good. He apologized, sorry. If I can't do it myself, I always feel that others can't do it either. I wonder if yang top's yin and yang imbalance has changed after this person's death? The merchant smiled bitterly. Not yet. Originally, it had changed a lot, but after this person passed away, the situation immediately returned to how it was before. It seems that there wasn't enough time, and the adjustment wasn't complete. Unfortunately, I don't know what sect this person is from. Is there more than one cultivator who has such a Tao state? Sigh. Yang Top doesn't know where to start looking even if he wants to. My friend, you came from afar. Have you met any orthodoxies who are proficient in the essence of the universe? Or have you heard of the Fifth Prince's reputation? Chapter 1787. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. This was a very special person. Without seeing it with his own eyes, he couldn't make a rash judgment. If all of this was true, then this person was a true saint. He respected saints, even if he didn't want to become one. He had figured out the origin of the Yang Qiao Heavenly Palace. It was conceivable that most of the top cultivators would be here. It was meaningless for him to go down to the domain. This could be proven by the many Yang spirit auras coming from the heavenly palace. How could he talk to these Yang dinglings? Where was the entry point? What choice would Yang Dingling make between the safety of the domain and the struggle to hide from the universe? This trip to Yang Dingling was somewhat useless. As they chatted, they saw cultivators coming in and out of the heavenly palace. So many people are going in and out. What are they doing? The merchant laughed. Moving the yin and yang requires unimaginable power. It's not something a cultivator can do. Therefore, these people are actually going in to provide basic magic power support and gather the power of many people. Then, they will be controlled by great cultivators who are proficient in the Tao realm. This has been going on for more than a year. They want to take advantage of the fact that the Fifth Prince's recuperation has not completely disappeared and try to preserve some of the results. However, according to the people who came out, the chances are slim. The current Yang Dingling and Yang Xiao are about to return to their pre-recuperation state. Or is it because their mastery of the Tao realm is not comprehensive enough? However, which orthodoxy or person is proficient in the essence of the five grand universes? Lu Xiaoyi was very clear that this was the same as when he used the heaven's eye to see the universe in the interior heaven. It required the gathering of everyone's spiritual power. However, it was everyone's magic power that was gathered here. Does every Yang Dingling Supreme have to go in and contribute their own power? The merchant smiled bitterly. Just the Yang spirit and the primordial spirit. It's not just Yang Dingling cultivators, but also foreign cultivators. Because the realm starts from the primordial spirit, the magic power can be called the elemental energy. This is a purer power that is easier to gather and move. Yin spirits like us can't do it. However, if you're in the primordial spirit realm, you can go in and give it a try. Not only can you help Yang Dingling, but you can also take this opportunity to experience the changes in the Tao. It's killing two birds with one stone. Lu Xiaoyi realized that something was wrong. You said that person is in the Yin spirit realm? Then, his cultivation level is also in the category of magic power. How did he control and move the Yang spirit primordial spirit? The venerable master was stumped by the question. He argued, extraordinary people must have extraordinary aspects. If he could manipulate the essence energy of the universe, then he should be able to control the essence energy with his magic power, right? What's wrong with you? Why are rats picking on me? You still don't believe that a Yin master can do this, right? Let me tell you, the world is big, and there are all kinds of strange things. There's so many monsters out there that ordinary people like you and me can't know all of them. Lu Xiaoyi smiled apologetically. He did not mind at all. He just liked to bicker. Besides, he also had some conflict with saints. Looking at the merchant's sincere unity and pride of the Yang Dingtian cultivators, she couldn't help but want to give him a blow. Anyway, she had nothing to do. Before she thought of how to get in touch with the Yang Dingtian cultivators, it was not bad to have someone to argue with. It wasn't that he was afraid of the slightest thing, but Yang Dingren's current business with the Heaven Palace was for the entire domain, which also included countless mortals. It wasn't right to disturb other people's business. Every cultivator should have the basic intention of benefiting mankind, or find an opportunity to pass a message through some channels. Hopefully, it wouldn't take too long for them to adjust their yin and yang. According to what you said, the Yang Dingtian primordial spirit and Yang spirit are all here. The merchant was quite proud. Of course, the forces of the Yang Dingtian are united, and they will never side with each other on major issues. For example, the five-ring evil thieves. For example, the survival of the stars. Lu Xiaoyi continued to look for trouble. Before coming to the Yang Dingtian, I have seen two Yang Dingtian primordial spirits. It seems that one is Yang and the other is Yin. How can they go out to cultivate at such a time and not care about the safety of the domain? He was being a little unreasonable. No matter how united a domain was, there would definitely be people with other important matters. For example, during the Five-Ring War, the Xinyuan Yang Gaguan Shan was not present. The merchant was very proud of the domain, and he spared no effort to refute this strange Taoist. How do you know that they didn't contribute? As the most outstanding magnetic force cultivator in the Yangding Tian, the magnetic force has a special effect in the balance of yin and yang. They even cooperated with the fifth prince in the same yin eye. Later, they left because they had important matters to attend to. How can they be lumped together? Lu Xiaoyi's heart moved. Haha, Daoist friend, you know a lot. The merchant's face was full of pride. Although I'm not talented and can only operate resources for the sect, my senior brother is a real yang god. He has always been in the heavenly palace and rarely comes out. I only know this when I occasionally meet him and talk about it. Daoist friend, although the value of your treasures is not low, my information is not easily heard. So, I won't treat you unfairly, right? Lu Xiaoyi smiled and said, I won't treat you unfairly. I won't treat you unfairly. Treasures have a price, but information is priceless. As a foreigner, it is best if I can know some inside information about the Yangding Tian. It can save me a lot of trouble. This is not something that can be solved with so-called resources. Thank you for your generosity, Daoist friend. This poor Daoist thanks you. The two parted ways, and each of them had gained something. Lu Xiaoyi, in particular, had gained even more. He wandered around the heavenly palace, looking for people to chat and inquire about information. He also paid attention to every Yin God Supreme. Unfortunately, he didn't find anything. However, he still had a better understanding of the merchant's words. He was a very professional person and didn't lie to him. He was thinking, if he hadn't taken out more treasures to guard against being too conspicuous, would he have obtained more inside information? There were a few suspicious points. First, and most importantly, how many people in this cultivation world could comprehend the essence of the universe on the basis of the 5 grands? He could barely be considered one. It was precisely because he was considered one that he knew how difficult it was to achieve this. The 5 grands innate Tao could be said to be the most unpopular Tao realm in the cultivation world. This was because people who walked in this direction were destined to have a major deficiency in their combat strength. Who knew? Unless they finally merged with this Tao. Among the 5 grands, there were very few people who cultivated one. Those who cultivated all 5 were extremely rare, unless they wanted to encompass all 36 great Taoists like him. Therefore, in terms of probability, rather than saying that this person specialized in cultivating the 5 grands, it was more likely that he had the same wild ambition as him. Thinking about it carefully, if he could do it, why couldn't others do it? Everyone had their own opportunities, and they were all different. The heavenly Tao wasn't his father. Thinking about it this way, it wasn't impossible for someone with the same ambition as him to appear in the cultivation world of the universe. Chapter 1788. The second suspicion was that there was a time window between this saint and Yangji and Yinji. Of course, this was all speculation. However, after Yangji and Yinji got along, they went to the strong magnetic field to practice and block people. This made people think of something. Finally, if the hole in his brain was bigger, what if this so-called saint came from some upper realm? Then everything would make sense. Using his half-immortal ability to operate his primary energy, at the same time having a variety of superior Tao state abilities, and knowing the general arrangement of many demons in the interior heaven, such a person was a Yin spirit perfected lord. Once he took a step forward, he would be the only one in the interior heaven. Lu Xiaoyi was very good at associating because there was indeed a force that had been secretly targeting him. From a sun god of heaven's choice to the 3 people from Luo Su's heaven's choice, they were all ahead of him. Obviously, the way the 3 pure ones traveled was not unique to the cultivation world. Many Orthodox Taoists and even Buddhists knew this way. As for this person dying in the Yin Eye, it didn't seem difficult to do. Capturing a perfected lord and hiding him somewhere, killing him when he wanted to escape, and then using the Tao celestial phenomenon as a cover to escape using some kind of spatial ability. These little tricks could also be easily done by Lu Xiaoyi. Why escape? Why pretend to be dead? It seemed to make sense. Gu Xing and Yin Ji were both dead. Since the mission had failed, what else could they do but escape? Wait for him to settle the score with that guy? As for pretending to be dead, this was actually the most harmless way to escape. There was no need to make any promises to the Yongding. As a saint, if you used an excuse to leave, would you still come back? If you came back, you might be caught by Lu Xiaoyi. If you didn't come back, you would lose your reputation. This was a very well-planned plan. Contact the 3 people to destroy others in the strong magnetic field, win people's hearts at the Yongding, and finally destroy the alliance of the 5 rings. At least destroy a small part of it. If all these inferences were true, it could be seen that this was a very cautious person. He was cautious and well-planned. Once he failed, he would make a prompt decision to leave without any hesitation. In other words, it was very likely that after Lu Xiaoyi killed the 3 people in the strong magnetic field, this guy had chosen to disguise himself and disappear from the scene. Then, through the interior sky, he directly went to the next place Lu Xiaoyi wanted to go, the anchor chain. It was very awesome and safe. More than a year had passed, so the anchor chain must have been set up, or was it light? Such an opponent was very interesting and also very challenging. He could run even faster than Runner Lu. If all these were true, this person's name should be Bamboo Hat. Vientiane Prince, Northern Vientiane. Back in the interior realm, everyone's understanding was that everything was renewed and the origin was restored. This was the foundation of the innate Tao of unification. This person seemed to have done the same when he moved the immortals. But now that he thought about it, it seemed that it could also be understood as all-encompassing. One interesting word was, is, was, yang, was, is, was, yang. It was impossible for him to chase after that person's footsteps. Otherwise, he would never be able to catch up. His plan was not a secret in the interior heaven. It could be speculated simply by who he met. Then, he took out the star chart and compared it. Lu Xiaoyi's itinerary was basically confirmed. He wasn't the only one who knew how to calculate distances in the universe. The only thing he could do now was to do his job well. Now, it seemed that the person hiding behind the scenes was more interested in him than his plan. So, the biggest possibility was that both of them chose the same path to immortal ascension. Damn it, there was still someone fighting with him for Hongmeng. He slowly floated into the heavenly palace. Obviously, this was not a completely unguarded place. Familiar faces could enter and leave freely, but a stranger like him could not. A Yin spirit perfected monarch stopped him politely. "Where are you from, Tao friend? What do you want? If you want to participate in the heavenly palace convergence, we need to know your background." Lu Xiaoyi's face was indifferent. "Go and report to your domain's manager that the 3rd prince is here to look for his junior brother." The Yin master's face was filled with shock. The 5th prince was a hero here. It had only been 1 or 2 years, and his senior brother had already come looking for him. Although it was a joke, he had to take it seriously. What if it was true? He was still counting on this group of princes to save him. When the news spread, several Yang Spirit Supremes appeared in front of him in an instant. They were not surprised, doubtful, or happy. The leader of the Yang Spirits looked at him and said gently, "Thank you. Are you the 3rd prince? Are you the senior brother of the 5th prince?" Lu Xiaoyi gently nodded. In fact, if he took out the token of the truthful prince, he could probably achieve his goal. However, it was still a task, and there was a difference in how far he went. If he just pulled Yang Dingren over and ended the Battle of Hung River, then everyone would go their separate ways. This was the most irresponsible, perfunctory action. To him, he still hoped that the 5th ring would have more strong reinforcements, not more enemies. Kindness was mutual, especially for this proud domain. It was difficult to expect them to lower their proud heads first. Since he had taken advantage of them and wanted to tie them to the 5th ring's war chariot, why not give them a way out first? Yes, I heard that Yang Dingrun was in trouble and that my junior brother had died because of it. I thought that it would not be good to give up halfway. Therefore, I came to do my best and bring my junior brother's remains home. Several young gods looked at each other. Although they did not show it, They did not believe it in their hearts. The third prince's arrival was too strange. In fact, it was as strange as the fifth prince. They were not children, and the young God Supremes had their own unique views on things. They had a lot of questions about the fifth prince's actions in the past few years, but it was beneficial to young Dingren's starbody. No matter how many questions they had, they could only keep it to themselves. Now, there was another one. Was it the same as the previous one? We don't even know your name. Yang Dingren appeared to be very cautious, but Lu Xiaoyi knew what they were suspicious of. The fifth prince was very mysterious. Even Lu Xiaoyi had a bellyful of doubts after hearing about him, let alone these experienced young gods. What can I say? I'm just asking for confirmation. Let's use facts to speak. I will control yin and yang, and everyone's cooperation is better than 1,000 words. Several young gods agreed. In the cultivation world, one had to use one's ability to speak. This was the most direct thing, whether it was good or bad, and what the purpose was, they would know with a try. The imbalance of yin and yang in Yang Dingren had troubled them for too long. Although it was not to the point where they were desperate, they had long lost hope in the abilities of their own domain's cultivators. They had placed their hopes on a foreign monk who was good at chanting scriptures. Chapter 1789. In the core area of the Yangxiao Celestial Palace, there was a passage that was thousands of feet deep that went straight to the core of the Yangxiao satellite. This was also the place where Yangding cultivators controlled yin and yang. With this as the center, hundreds of Yang God and Essence Soul cultivators were sitting in a circle on the ground, transmitting spiritual power to the Earth's core through a special array. In the center of the Earth, an old man with white hair and beard was doing his best. He was the old cultivator who had the deepest understanding of yin and yang and the 5 elements. Although his Tao realm was profound, he didn't have a deep understanding of the 5 elements. It was difficult for him to solve the deep problem of Yang Ding's imbalance of yang energy. If a young cultivator like Lu Xiaoyi presided over it and was still an Essence Soul cultivator, people might not be convinced. However, since there was the 5th prince before, it was acceptable for the 3rd prince to appear now. The key was that no one would lie about this kind of thing. Yang Ding gathered almost all his strength, and the result of pretending to be a ghost here was self-evident. If he didn't have any ability, this was not a place to brag. Seeing that everyone stopped and looked at him, Lu Xiaoyi had seen a big scene, so his expression was calm and his manners were proper. Has my junior brother left any traces of artifacts, changes to the array, or images? The leader of the Yang God group, Kong Yangzi, shook his head. No, let's put it this way. There is no trace of your junior brother here at all. There are no artifacts, no slough, and no words. It's like he has never been here. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Well, my junior brother has such a weird temper. He didn't expect anything in return for his kindness. He deserved to die. So, I need to divide the cultivators of your world according to the 5 elements. Listen to my arrangement. In addition, 2 more Yang God seniors will go down with me. Kong Yangzi was a little strange, and Lu Xiaoyi could feel it, so he smiled. Does my junior brother go down alone, without anyone accompanying him? Kong Yangzi nodded. Yes. Your junior brother spends most of his time in the depths of the Earth's core alone. He never needs my help, and only needs to provide elemental energy support. Only in the beginning did 2 magnetic cultivators go down, but they left quickly. It seems that the magnetic force is useless here. I knew it. Lu Xiaoyi smiled slightly, and his heart was even more certain. The 8 immortals each have their own unique abilities, but I'm different from my junior brother. Why don't I give it a try and see the effect? Yang Ding and the other cultivators followed his instructions. This 3rd prince was humble and amiable, and he treated people with tolerance. He gave people a sense of closeness, which was different from his junior martial brother's arrogance. He made people feel that he was more approachable. He stretched out his hand. Which 2 seniors would like to go down with me? Kong Yangzi stepped forward. I'll go down with senior apprentice Brother Yu Yang. Cultivators used their Tao realm to adjust their yin and yang, and each had their own unique secrets. Usually, it was taboo to have outsiders around. If there was someone close to them, it was also a learning process. For outsiders, this was a rare opportunity. Outside the circle, 100 young gods and primordial spirits sat in a circle. Lu Xiaoyi bowed. The change of yin and yang in the domain is not something that can be changed by one person. The only difference between us is the division of labor. Everyone is indispensable. I will do my best down there, and I still need everyone's support. The 100 cultivators all returned the greeting. This was an attitude. With this attitude, even if he didn't succeed, no one would deliberately make things difficult for him. Kang Yangzi and Yu Yang followed the young man down, and their confidence in the cultivator in front of them increased a little. At their position, they no longer judged people by their cultivation realm, but by the way they handled things. The third prince in front of them was much more mature than the fifth prince. Only such a person could go far, because unless they had no other choice, no one was willing to be an enemy of such a person. What kind of orthodoxy could cultivate such a talent? Crown Prince? Dragon Palace? Or a mortal? The depth of thousands of feet was just a moment for the three of them. Lu Xiaoyi looked around. It was indeed very narrow down there. It was not that he didn't have the ability to make it bigger, but it was actually disadvantageous to use the Dao realm to make a hole in the yin's eye. It was suspected that it would destroy the natural structure. Lu Xiaoyi politely said to the two old cultivators, "One person's plan is short, but three people's plan is long. If there's something that I can't do, I hope the two seniors can give me more advice. Especially on yin and yang, I actually don't know much. Later, I'll have a lot to rely on. I hope the two seniors will not hesitate to teach me." "You don't know much about yin and yang? Then what are you doing here?" But the two old young gods didn't express their dissatisfaction. This young man was impeccable in his conduct, and they couldn't bear to criticize him. Lu Xiaoyi moved around the yin's eye. "I need to do a little investigation. I asked the two seniors to protect me." Then he entered a meditative state, and his divine sense turned into the Dao realm of the five elements, sinking into Yang Qiao's satellite. He carefully sensed and searched for the source of Yang Qiao's five elements and yin and yang. The two old cultivators also sat cross-legged beside him, feeling the changes in Yang Qiao under this person's control. It was very slight. It was just a touch, but he didn't try to change anything. This was the practice of a cautious person, and also the true essence of the Dao realm of Taoism. In this kind of perception, they found that this child's five elements ability was extremely profound and had reached a high level. It was just that his connection with yin and yang seemed a little immature, but the flaws couldn't obscure the beauty. 2 hours later, Lu Xiaoyi said solemnly, "Seniors, please lend me a trace of the true essence of yin and yang." Yu Yang didn't hesitate at all. In this situation, he couldn't hide anything. This wasn't for teaching, nor was it for apprenticeship. This was for the realm, and there was nothing to be selfish about. Later, Kang Yangzi also joined in. Yang Qiao was very small, and with the strength of 3 people, they could control it. Lu Xiaoyi began to try to adjust the 5 elements of this star. Where it affected yin and yang, the 2 old cultivators naturally assisted him. At first, they felt that this young man's 5 elements operation was a little reckless, and it had nothing to do with the adjustment, causing the satellites yin and yang to be unstable. The 2 old cultivators were experienced and could only help him find out what he missed. It was only later that they understood that this was just seeking to cooperate with their 5 elements yin and yang. In a word, it was to feel each other out before joining forces so that they could really get started later. He was really careful to the extreme, and his methods were completely different from his junior brother, the 5th prince. It was even more reassuring. If one didn't look at the appearance, this was the behavior of an old cultivator. One day later, they were familiar with each other, and Lu Xiaoyi sent out an invitation to the cultivators on the magic formation. "Borrow half of the yang and yin. Take me to the Yang Peak." The cultivators were indeed a little anxious as they waited. This 3rd crown prince was someone who could truly keep his composure. However, he was unlike the 5th crown prince, who had directly penetrated the essence of the five cosmos the moment he appeared. They just didn't know who would be the underdog between the two brothers. Half of the strength, half of the 10%. Just by looking at the strength used, it was still a test, but this time the test was extended to the Yang peak with the help of everyone's supernatural power. The purpose of this was not only to borrow strength, but also to let everyone participate and feel the changes in it together, and not simply to use them, the peripheral cultivators, as supernatural power output machines. This person said that everyone was indispensable, and he did what he said. Chapter 1790. Relying on everyone's joint efforts, Lu Xiaoyi did everything he did on Yang Xiao planet again on Yangding. This kind of dawdling skill made everyone feel unbearable. Even the seasoned fisherman Yang Kong Yangzi had some doubts about whether this grandson was dawdling in his work. If he didn't have this ability, then why was he playing tricks here? After another month of dawdling on Yangding, almost everyone was sitting and waiting. The meager output of magical power was almost negligible. Before everyone lost their patience, the third prince was finally ready to start. Good wind, send me to the sky with force. 30% of the power. The cultivator's spirits were lifted. It was time to verify the quality. The magical power of nearly 100 primordial spirit Yang spirits was concentrated with the help of the formation. The total amount was majestic. However, Lu Xiaoyi had long been familiar with the characteristics of their magical power. With a little adjustment, he directly turned to Yangding and instantly turned into Tai Yi. The universe was born from then on. Yu Yang and Kong Yangzi's eyes were filled with surprise. They didn't expect that the third prince was really dawdling, but when he took action, he was really bold and decisive. It was as if he didn't consider how to wrap things up after his failure. When the fifth prince borrowed everyone's magical power to evolve the essence of the universe, the most he borrowed was only 30%. They didn't expect him to start with 30%. The preparation was indeed sufficient, but when it was implemented, the style changed drastically. It was like a fierce wind and raging fire, wild and unruly. Want to end the yin and yang path? Go to the next level. 50% of the power. Under the support of the magical power of the cultivators, the Tai Yi Dao realm became more and more majestic. It didn't change the internal yin and yang of Yangding, but it directly penetrated the essence of the formation stage of the stars. Next, it would penetrate the whole process of the formation of Yangding. Of course, this kind of penetration didn't take the timeline, but the line of material change. Under the Tai Yi Dao realm, the entire Yangding seemed to turn into nothingness, disappearing from the perception of the cultivators. They knew that it didn't really disappear, and even the mortals living on it wouldn't feel anything. However, from the perspective of the cultivators, Yangding had indeed disappeared, disappearing into the Tai Yi of nothingness before the formation of the universe. Such a miraculous feat was truly admirable. Compared to the fifth prince's concealment last time, he showed strong confidence in the heroic Dafa. It was as if I was the universe, and the universe was me. Although they didn't know what would happen in the future, Yang Dingtian and the other cultivators had benefited greatly from this experience. They also believed that this person's strength must be far above the fifth prince's. From then on, they all went all out and concentrated, not daring to have the slightest bit of disloyalty. Yu Yang and Kong Yangzi were so excited that they couldn't control themselves. It wasn't that their state of mind as Yang gods wasn't good enough, but that the future of a realm had been defeated in their hands. This pressure was too heavy to bear. To these domain elders, the leaders of a domain, they could choose not to become immortals. They could choose not to prolong their lifespans, but it was their responsibility to hand over the great rivers and mountains of the domain to their descendants. They had not seen any hope for 1,000 years, but this time what they saw was not the dawn, but a raging fire. They couldn't help for the time being, but the two of them stood up straight and circled behind their backs. Their chi activity spread out, and they were ready to attack. At this moment, if anyone dared to barge in and cause trouble, that would be the end of a fight to the death. Lu Xiaoyi saw that the Tao momentum had begun to rise. He didn't hesitate any longer. In the vast universe, I'm happy. 70% power. The cultivators of Yangding worked together, and their spirit and willpower were in perfect harmony. With a surge of mana, under the control of Lu Xiaoyi, a wisp of innate qi appeared out of thin air where the Yangding domain had disappeared in everyone's eyes. Like a little light in the eternal darkness, it not only illuminated the universe, but also the hope in people's hearts. 70% of the mana output was already the output of a cultivator in a normal battle. However, they all knew that this was only the second of the 5 ties, and there was still a third. They still didn't know when the 5 elements, yin and yang, would appear. Would it appear? If every change in the Tao state required the support of mana output, how could they withstand it? They had to withstand it even if they couldn't. The mother planet was right below them, and there was no room for retreat. Coincidentally, every cultivator began to use their own methods. Great medicines, magical pets, and Tao weapons began to crazily replenish themselves. No one would remind the third prince to use it sparingly. At this moment, they were only afraid that the changes in heaven and earth were not intense enough and swift enough. Even if they would be sucked dry, they would be willing. That wisp of innate qi became more and more vigorous in everyone's senses. From wisps of it, it became a blazing torch, and, in the end, it seemed to have burned the entire universe. Raise the fire to burn the primordial world and establish the heavens from now on. 90% power. The innate qi expanded and burned to the extreme in everyone's senses, and it began to gradually dissipate. The Taishu state that had a shape but no substance appeared in everyone's senses. It was a star, an elephant, a cloud, a wind. There was a hazy gray fog, and shadows were everywhere. One of them was pure black in color, and it was completely different from the surroundings that had a shape but no substance. Even if it was surrounded by the Taishu images, it couldn't erase that trace of abnormality. Everyone was shocked. They all felt that this thing seemed to be the source of the chaos after the formation of Yangding. However, because it was too long ago, no one could recognize what it was. Lu Xiaoyi's transformation didn't stop. 11% power. With form but substance, it was Taishu. At this point, in everyone's Tao realm perception, where the Yangding used to be, countless scattered and irregular existences of various sizes began to form. They were solid but not solid, liquid but not liquid, gas but not gas. As for that black spot, it was even clearer, but they still couldn't see what it was. How could such an ancient and strange existence be known by tiny creatures like them? Then, a wave of chaotic aura spread out. It was the state of chaos before yin and yang. The transformation speed suddenly increased. Chaos gives birth to the universe, and milk is mother. 13%, the power of drinking milk. The eyes of the Yangding cultivators bulged, and the mana in their bodies flowed out crazily. With their eyesight and knowledge, they naturally knew that this was the most crucial moment. If they missed this opportunity, they wouldn't have it again. They didn't need to think too much about themselves and their star domain. Infinity and Taiji, all things were born. At this moment, under the unreserved output of nearly 100 great cultivators, all those chaotic beings suddenly squeezed inwards, and a primitive Yangding started to form. The position of that black spot on the Yangding was completely exposed. It's the underworld ring sinkhole. A Yangding cultivator couldn't help but shout. Lu Xiaoyi activated the Taiji Dao realm and shouted, "Yin and Yang separation." Yuyang Kanyangzi had been watching from the side for a long time, and he knew that this was the most crucial moment. Previously, through the 5 Taishu backtracking and evolving the boundary changes, he found the root and location of the yin flourishing and the yang declining. Now, he should strike while the iron is hot and bring out the essence of that troublemaker, or destroy it. All of this must be realized in the process of Taiji turning into yin and yang. Chapter 1791. When yin and yang separated, the black spot that had been dormant and motionless began to struggle violently. However, in the process of searching for the essence of a universe, the cultivators had already locked onto it as a target. Even if it was an ancient object, under the combined efforts of 100 great cultivators, it was uprooted. Without a place to stay, this aura was constantly being worn down as it ran around in all directions. At this point, everyone understood that this thing was the source of the disaster. It had been hidden so deeply that it would be impossible to discover its existence without looking at the essence of the universe. Then, a question appeared in everyone's mind. Did the fifth prince also discover this thing? Or was the fifth prince's death related to this thing? This was an aura that was discovered during the Taisho stage, but it was hard to say when it was produced. It was burned out by the innate qi, but it might not have come from the Taisho stage. It might have come from the beginning, or it might have come from the Tai stage. It was an aura that couldn't be any more ancient. However, no one could understand how it affected Yangding's yin and yang. What was the mechanism? Was it active or intentional? Or was it unconscious? All they could do was bring it out from the depths of Yangding to the surface, and then from the surface to Yangqiao. But they couldn't completely destroy it. This stage was also the stage where the cultivators were crazily outputting their magic power. No one knew if this thing was allowed to escape. Would it continue to return to the Yangding domain to hide and cause trouble, or go to other star domains in the universe? In terms of mood, they had to remove the roots. They couldn't leave any regrets. Yu Yang and Kong Yangzi became the main combat power at this stage. Lu Xiaoyi was reduced to cooperating with them. Under the application of the two old Yang God cultivators, he returned to his usual rhythm of stealing their knowledge. Yin and Yang were closely related to the five elements. His attainments in the five elements were quite deep, so he learned about Yin and Yang very quickly. In the process of learning, he found that the efforts of the Yangding cultivators didn't have much effect. This thing couldn't be solved by the Yin and Yang Dao realm. In other words, it couldn't be solved by any Dao realm for the time being. Yang also found this problem. We can't deal with it. Third Prince, can you try to use the power of the five elements again? Lu Xiaoyi took over the control again. He didn't have the confidence to deal with this completely unfamiliar thing. Because he didn't understand it, he couldn't make a plan to deal with it. He could only reluctantly do it. The previous operation was actually all his ability. He wanted to use the process of the universe's formation to discover where Yangding's problem came from. He did it, but he couldn't solve it. Now, it was like forcing a duck onto a perch. But the effect was beyond everyone's expectations. Before Lu Xiaoyi's great Dao concept could be fully unleashed, that thing suddenly disappeared. It looked like his 5 grand Dao realm was the right medicine for the problem. Was it over? Is it over? All the cultivators searched for it, but they completely lost track of it. Kong Yangzi let out a long breath. This favor was too great, and he didn't know how to repay it. The magic power dissipated. Everything was over, but it was also the beginning. Old Taoist Yu Yang looked at him calmly and said, "Fellow Taoist, you and the fifth prince are not fellow disciples. Your techniques are completely different. If my guess is correct, he isn't the so-called fifth prince, and you aren't the third prince either. You're from the interior heaven." Lu Xiaoyi smiled without saying a word. The cultivators outside might not be able to sense it, but these two old fogies were definitely able to sense it. Kong Yangzi muttered, "The fifth prince isn't actually dead." Lu Xiaoyi spread out his hands. "I don't have any evidence, but it's not difficult to escape." The two young gods didn't say anything. Of course, it was easy to do. It was just that they didn't want to think in that direction. For someone who had once extended a helping hand to Yangding, no one would be willing to judge him with malice. But once suspicion arose and they thought back, there were too many abnormalities. It was just that they were immersed in the joy of solving the problem and didn't want to think too much about it. Kong Yangzi was very sharp. Your opponents? Lu Xiaoyi took out the token of the innocent prince. It's all here. Take a look. The two old Yang gods scanned it with their divine senses and immediately had mixed feelings. The enemy had become the benefactor. This was the most difficult cause and effect to clear up. Lu Xiaoyi knew that this kind of conversation was very important. If he wasn't careful, what he did before might be in vain. I'm just for the mortals of Yangding. It has nothing to do with Yangding's cultivation world. The reason why I acted was because of the mysterious fifth prince. So, you don't need to be in a dilemma. There are two things that I need an answer to. First, will you join the Extermination Alliance? Second, I need all the information about the fifth prince. I don't believe that you didn't leave any traces. The two old Taoists looked at each other. Kong Yangzi was very straightforward. We will join. 30 Yang gods who are the best at fighting will set off immediately. There's nothing to hesitate about. As for the information about the fifth prince, he didn't show any malice towards Yangding. We can't hurt other friends just because we want to thank you. This isn't the way of cultivation. Lu Xiaoyi wasn't angry. Instead, he took out a shadow recording stone. Take a look. Then you can decide whether the fifth prince is Yangding's friend. The video was very short, but it was clear at a glance. Kong Yangzi's face was very ugly. There were various reasons, such as the fifth prince's private instigation and the swordsman's ruthlessness. But in the end, he controlled himself and didn't show it. Yangding's attitude towards the five rings had already been divided into two factions, and they were opposing each other. So far, the best method was to control the cause of death of the two magnetic force cultivators and use the opportunity of the return of Yin and Yang to choose to reconcile. If they were to continue opposing each other, it would be too difficult for Yangding in terms of the overall situation. Who is that monk? Lu Xiaoyi played it down. He's from the Hengi Orthodoxy, Kong Yangzi's side. In the end, he couldn't avoid this trap. In fact, it wasn't important to Yangding whether or not he joined this alliance to suppress the Hengi Orthodoxy. They didn't interfere with each other and didn't have any connections. Of course, he wouldn't feel any psychological burden if he fought. However, the problem was that the initiator this time was the fifth ring. If he chose to join, it meant that he was biased towards the fifth ring and away from the East Heaven Main World Buddhism. Originally, they didn't want to choose a faction so quickly, but now, it seemed that they had no choice. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind. He was also a decisive person and wouldn't be overcautious in such a situation. The changes in the universe were accelerating, and there wasn't much time left for everyone. It was impossible to make a choice after seeing the clues of the strong and the weak. That would be the stupidest delusion. Later, senior brother Yu Yang will give you something in this regard. It might not be comprehensive, but that person is really careful. We can't go too far. I'm representing Yangding here. As long as the fifth ring has Taoist Lu, Yangding will not continue to resist. I'm willing to cooperate with the fifth ring on appropriate occasions. Chapter 1792. Lu Xiaoyi breathed a sigh of relief. At least the results in Yangding were not bad. Yangding's yin and yang treatment would continue. It was like a person whose accumulated load was gone, but he still needed to spend a lot of time to recuperate. This was Yangding's problem, and it was a painstaking effort. He didn't hide the fact that he killed Yang Ji and Yin Ji, and he never bothered to hide it. However, how far this matter spread was Kong Yangzi and Yu Yang's business. Now, it seemed that they had adopted the most rational response. Resolving a hidden problem that had existed for millions of years was a great virtue. He could use this to ask Yangding for something, but if he did, it might be an exchange of interests. If he didn't ask for anything, he would use this great virtue as a cornerstone to get along with, and there would be endless possibilities. He had been preparing. The happy life of a general or a crow ancestor was not his path. He also didn't want to be an ancestor who needed the younger generation to wipe his ass for him. The most basic attribute of a pawn was to do one's duty well. When he left Yangding, he received the highest courtesy from Yangding. Even if his identity as the fifth ring Xinyuan swordsman was now known to the world, he still received the recognition of every major cultivator in Yangding because he saved their mother. I like to join the fun. This is probably the unified impression that the universe has of me. When he left, he faced hundreds of supreme Yangding cultivators and laughed at himself. If the universe is calm and peaceful, and it is more lively to recall the past and resolve hatred, then I will be a vengeful person. If the future is more exciting and unpredictable, then I will look forward. In comparison, I think the future will be exciting for at least 10,000 years, and I don't want to miss it. This requires me to focus. The worst thing is to mix the past and the future together, just like mixing new and old fat together. The result is mellow and fierce intertwined, full of vigor, and also to the top. Everyone more or less knows about karma. If everyone puts their own karma together, it will become a ball of thread that can never be torn apart. So we need to know what's important and what's not. We need to learn how to forget and how to be patient. What Lu Xiaoyi did today was not to show kindness deliberately, and it was not the heart of a saint. It was just an accident of countless coincidences. Forget it. Then everyone would try to be friends. Let's see if it's possible for us to stand together in the storm of the future. After Lu Xiaoyi left, he didn't know if he managed to find an ally for fifth ring Xinyuan. But in terms of personal charm, Yang Ding was convinced. He was in a hurry to leave, but it wasn't only because he was in a hurry to leave. No matter how much he hurried, he wouldn't be able to catch up to that bamboo hat. He was in a hurry to find a secluded place because he wanted to figure out that mysterious thing that had entered the depths of his Sparrow Palace's consciousness. That's right, that aura, that strange existence hadn't been destroyed at all. Instead, it had burrowed into his sea of consciousness, as if this was its new home. If it stayed, it wouldn't leave. It couldn't be chased away, dispelled, or melted. This was the current state of this thing. Lu Xiaoyi needed to study it carefully, not because he wanted to get any help from it, but because he was worried that this thing would ruin his cultivation. On Suntop Planet, it did not have much use. But this wasn't absolute. After all, for millions of years, it was still very obedient most of the time. Otherwise, it wouldn't be as prosperous as Yangding was now. As for the consequences now, it was just a mysterious reaction caused by the changes in the universe. He believed that this thing was passively changing. Even so, he still had to figure it out. Because if he took this thing in for an individual cultivator, the changes would be much more frequent than the changes in the universe. If it really messed up the juncture of his cultivation, he might not be able to bear it. He sat cross-legged in the air, sank his mind into his sea of consciousness, and used all kinds of methods. Spiritual consciousness, doubt, realm contact, Sparrow Palace pressure. In the end, he had no choice but to accept the fact that this thing was at least at a higher level than him, a half-immortal. Therefore, all his efforts were in vain. After many attempts, the only result he got was that this was probably an existence that was formed before Taishu. For some unknown reason, it rejected the normal changes in the universe and stuck to itself, waiting to wake up or never wake up. He didn't rashly try to force it. This thing was in the wrong place. It was in his sea of consciousness, which was the most difficult place for humans. Those fragments of the great Tao didn't show any abnormalities. They didn't welcome the newcomer, nor did they reject him. It was as if they didn't see him and didn't feel anything. It felt a little like the primordial purple chi in the legends of his previous life, but he knew that this wasn't it. In this cultivation world, the 3 graces were still after the 5 graces, but this aura had already appeared at least during Taishu's time, or perhaps even earlier. After thinking about it, he wasn't completely sure if his harvest this time was a blessing or a curse. He could only continue to walk and see, but he secretly reminded himself that fate was actually a double-edged sword. If he used the same thing well, it would be a blessing. If he didn't use it well, it would be a curse. It wasn't certain. He was exceptionally careful with his own path. Because he had reached the half-immortal realm, It was no longer possible for him to hide himself among the huge group of cultivators like before. Sometimes he would ask himself if he was the inheritor of the Sword Mountain Range, the most restless group in the universe, and thorns were constantly emerging. Then to some people, would he really be allowed to develop and grow freely? Impossible, in view of the fact that immortals and half-immortals couldn't descend to the mortal world. There wouldn't be any direct targeting, but there would be a lot of secret planning. Then, was this bamboo hat part of it? This was also the characteristic of his meticulous thinking. Along the way, he had been secretly laying traps, and he had a feeling of uneasiness. Zhou was the first time he was stopped. Then it was Luo Sutian, Yongding. He got through it without any danger. Not only did he kill the opponent who provoked him, but he also gained the recognition of most of the Buddhist monks in Luo Sutian. It could be said that he gained a lot. But was it really like this? If it was too smooth, it meant that you might not realize where the danger came from. Was it the inner demon wearing the bamboo hat? He didn't think so. At least this person didn't pose a threat to him now. But there was one thing he was very curious about. How did this person manage to walk in front of him every time? Every cultivator had their own pattern of activity before becoming a half-immortal, and it didn't completely overlap. Even Qing Xian, who had been traveling with him for nearly 1,000 years, actually didn't have the same cultivation path as him. His experience was rarely seen among cultivators. He had been to many great realms, and this was not an ordinary run. There were very few cultivators at the same level in the universe who could match him, not to mention that there were people who had more trajectories than him. Especially, he could cover his tracks. How'd he do it? Could it be explained by coincidence? Or was there another reason? Chapter 1793. In the depths of the universe, a true spirit loomed. Many years had passed, but he had his responsibilities. In this position, he would never be idle. The heavenly Tao collapsed, and the universe changed. There were very few people who could stay in the lower realm to control the leaders. Moreover, all of them had to restrict their own behavior. This was the rule. Although the heavenly Tao was collapsing, the core was still there. Especially in this final stage, it was even more impartial and crazy. The slightest indulgence would be severely punished. In such troubled times, no one was willing to fall before the final change. He had been in charge of heaven's eye for many years. Not to mention meritorious deeds, he didn't make any mistakes either. He just wanted to peacefully get through this final stage and see what kind of fate a true immortal like him would end up in the end. Heaven's eye had for leaders, no matter high or low. However, as a human leader, he was in charge of the eastern sky. There was no need to doubt his right to speak here, even if he was more and more unwilling to use this right now. The more he moved, the more trouble there would be. However, there were still some deep pits that he had to jump into. There was greater pressure from above, and also from the self-protection instinct of the orthodoxy. In this kind of silence, consciousness descended and briefly communicated with each other in their hearts. Finally, as for the lower realm of half-immortals, there have been signs since the middle stage of the universe's transformation. Some ambitious people will get the first chance. You have to pay attention to their actions and control the abnormality within an acceptable range. The true spirit existence was speechless. I will do my best, but I don't know what's the point of doing this. It will bring a great impact to the lower realm. In fact, before they came to the lower realm, they had already begun to plan to massacre the lower realm. The consciousness played it down. No matter, let them be. It's not just one group, but two groups. Since they're jumping around happily, we have to give them a stage to show off. That place is just right. The true spirit existence understood tacitly. The higher-ups were indeed brilliant. The geniuses of the inner and outer scenic heavens were the first to descend to the lower realm. This was something that the immortal court could not control. This was the natural process of the changes in the great Tao. However, What they could do was to bring the two groups of people who were not convinced of each other together through an ingenious method. If they had a battle, it would be the best way to destroy humanity. No one could say anything. After the consciousness communication, it gradually faded away, leaving behind only a faint divine intent. Have you sent out the thing I asked you to arrange? The true spirit existence replied, It's been sent out. Borrowing someone else's hand and throwing a brick to attract jade is an opportunity. But what I don't understand is, can such a precious thing be given away? The faintly discernible divine intent grew fainter and fainter. It's only precious if it's useful. If he couldn't use it, it would just be a mere worldly possession. Since we can't use it, why not give it to the most outstanding juniors? The true soul being sighed softly. There were two sides to a matter, good and bad. This was the dialectic of the cultivation world. However, these experts had never mentioned that this kind of duality also depended on probability. If the bad side accounted for 99% of the time, and the good side only existed in theory, would it still be two-sided? It was just a trick to fool the cultivators below. However, he still had to deal with this matter without leaving any traces. This was a kind of instinctive self-protection. He lowered his consciousness and issued a command through the heaven's eye system. Now that everything is done, you should return to the interior heaven as soon as possible. The heaven's eye's concealment won't last long. When it comes to fighting for Tao, one should take a long view of the future. There was no need to rush it. Otherwise, no one would be able to save you. The people below were obsessed with fighting and killing, but this was a very stupid method. Only when one reached their realm would they know that the best way to kill someone was to let them cultivate until they died. This was the true meaning. Lu Xiaoyi realized that he was in some trouble. It wasn't the problem of the anchor chain. In fact, he had already handed over the problem of the anchor chain to a group of emissaries, such as Luminous Light. They had been working here for hundreds of years and had nothing to do, so it wouldn't be abrupt for them to come forward. He went directly to Fuqian to complete the connection between the last two realms. 60 years had passed since then, which meant that the group of 5-ring yang gods had been flying in the void for 60 years. They weren't too far away from the anchor chain. Just as he had always been used to, he would cultivate as he hurried along the long journey. He was already familiar with this pattern. Since he started to establish his superego more than 60 years ago, his superego had been finalized and perfected. All that was left was the polishing of time. He didn't need to deliberately spend time. It was like a person who had reached adulthood and had a skeleton. The remaining flesh and blood was only related to his experience. If he did well, he would be a little fat. If he didn't, he would be a skeleton. With his superego set, he began to search for his past. According to the situation after he became a yang god, he needed a stable rebirth point. Because it was an ancient method, he didn't need to hide it too much. He only needed to be stable and consistent. This was what he needed to do now. When all this began, he fell into a dilemma. Compared to the countless pasts of others, his pasts were pitifully small. It was as if he only had two parts. One was the memory of his past life, and the other was a flying sword. This made his search for the past somewhat illusory and discordant. Of course, he knew that he was a transmigrator. His past life was an indispensable part of his life, but he also thought that his past couldn't be just this, right? Wasn't it a little too monotonous? What about the past of Lu Xiaoyi, the real body that he occupied? Was it erased just like that? There was also a past that was a sword. It didn't even have any story or growth experience. It was just a lonely sword standing there, making people baffled. He also understood that there was an unbreakable connection between him and this flying sword. He could even associate it with a lot of things, starting from Lord Jiao and the peacock plume, and the shock hidden deep in the hearts of those seniors in the dome. He knew all of it. There was also Ba Jie and Uncle Zhai, and the Black Dragon. All of these were probably related to his past experience with this flying sword. The flying sword's past didn't show anything. He also couldn't remember if he was originally a flying sword, or was he an amazing swordsman. Otherwise, it didn't make sense for him to have such a powerful swordsman talent. The more he cultivated, the more he felt that his talent in swordsmanship was helpful to him. Could it be that I was that grandson Li Wuya in my past life? As soon as this thought appeared, it immediately made him feel uneasy and uncomfortable. He didn't know what others would think. Would they be secretly happy that he might be the reincarnation of some earth-shattering figure in history? Would they think that he had an extraordinary background? Anyway, he wouldn't. He respected Ancestor Crow from the bottom of his heart. He was an amazing figure, a figure that could move the universe. He might be a good elder, a good sword immortal, a good master, or even a good father, but he just couldn't be him. This made Lu Xiaoyi unable to place his pride. Chapter 1794. From Lu Xiaoyi's point of view, he should be himself and could only be himself. Even if he was a worm, an ant, forever crawling on the ground, that would still be the one and only him. When he discovered that his past was somewhat mysterious, he, who had always looked down on those reincarnated people for no reason, discovered that he was the biggest bug among the reincarnated cultivators. He had lived a life that even he hated. If he didn't work hard, would he still be where he was now? For 2,000 years, he walked step by step, always thinking that it was because of his hard work and effort, but in the end, he discovered that he might be the most awesome second-generation cultivator in the universe. If all of this was true, then what was the point of this kind of cultivation? For the first time, he had doubts about himself. To a cultivator, this was a very dangerous step. If it wasn't handled well, it could destroy the mental state that had been established for 2,000 years. After 2 periods, he still wasn't satisfied. He began to search for his true self, a self that could satisfy him and continue to cultivate. Regrettably, other than these 2 periods of his past, everything else was empty. Under normal circumstances, normal people would choose this flying sword as their reference point of their past. Anyone could see that it was extraordinary, just like an immortal sword. If anyone wanted to cut him in the past, who knew how many people would be buried by this immortal sword? But his first choice was definitely not to choose this immortal sword. If he had to have an immortal sword, then it could only be Qi and no other. This was very important to him, because only then could he be his true self, and not another person's continuation in another way. Even if that person used to be incomparably glorious. While flying, he kept thinking about this problem, considering all aspects, cultivation, fighting, future height, connections, and so on. Inheriting this kind of past would only bring him benefits and no harm. Except for one thing, whether or not he could get past himself. In terms of ethics, he had fallen into a vicious circle, which also deepened his confusion about reincarnation. If everyone had a past life, and they all had different forms of life in different periods of time, then where did the prosperity of mankind come from? Where did the increase in population come from? Was it the decrease in worms? That didn't seem to be the case. Following the stable development of the universe, other than a very small number of mutants, those large races seemed to have expanded countless times, and it wasn't just humans. What kind of reincarnation did these new ones come from? The foundation of the perfect mechanism of the great Tao of reincarnation was that the total amount was constant, but he could not see this. What he saw was a universe where the population was exploding, and so was the insect's mouth. This was his intuition. He hoped to become the inheritor of Xuanyuan's sword vein in this era, but he definitely didn't want to do it in this way. He was a transmigrator, but at the same time, he was also a native. Then who was he? Was he a transmigrator? Was it an immortal sword? Or was it someone else? That young master from Lu province? Throughout this journey, he had been constantly searching for his past, constantly weighing his options in his heart. This was not looking for trouble, but a true attitude of being responsible for his own future. The future superego determines the direction, and the past self determines the origin. Is it wise to give up on a divine sword? Was he putting on an act? Was it just for his own pitiful pride? What was the purpose behind the immortal sword? What would he lose if he gave it up? These were all things that he needed to consider. It was hard to determine the future. It would determine whether his foundation was upright or not. This would affect the height he could reach in the end. The floating and sinking realm was hidden in a vast nebula of gas and dust. As it moved according to the laws of its own celestial body, it would sometimes rise from the nebula and sometimes sink into the nebula. It was like the rising and falling of the sun on the surface of the sea. This was called floating and sinking. It was very spectacular. From the perspective of cultivators in the universe, it was impossible for mortals to appreciate the beauty of their celestial bodies. Before he even got close to the macromembrane, a yang spirit flashed out of it, followed by a few primordial spirit divine lords. Lu Xiaoyi didn't avoid them. Floating and sinking had a worldly macromembrane. He couldn't enter and leave other people's worldly macromembranes without making a sound. If he really did so, it would be very impolite. But when the Yang spirit spoke, he was still shocked. Fellow Taoist Lu, you've come to floating and sinking to invite troops, right? A year ago, 30 Yang spirits of my floating and sinking set out to assemble in the beast territory. This humble Taoist, Go Yu, has been waiting here. He rubbed his nose, feeling a bit embarrassed. It's a bit shameful for a diplomatic envoy to get to this point. It turns out that my actions have been noticed by someone, but I don't know who did it. In the future, I'll go and thank them when I meet them. Go Yu smiled. Don't bring the disputes between the evildoers of your interior heaven to the main world. We don't know who sent the message. He has the investigation of the cultivators of our floating and sinking upper realm, so it can't be faked. In addition, he also asked me to tell you that he also conveyed the news of the light world on your behalf. He's just afraid that fellow Taoist Lu will be tired from running errands. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. It wasn't that he didn't trust this floating and sinking yang spirit, but this bamboo hat man's actions were always unexpected. It seemed that he wasn't as incompetent as he thought. Obviously, this bamboo hat man's connections in Eastern Elephant Heaven were limited. It was already not easy to find a few helpers in Zhou Luo Su Heaven, and Yangding. It was indeed impossible to find more helpers. A Northern Heaven orthodoxy could stir up trouble in Eastern Heaven. This ability couldn't be underestimated. If Lu Xiaoyi went to Northern Heaven, apart from Zhou, he wouldn't be able to find a single helper. Go Yu was very considerate. If fellow Taoist Lu still has doubts, I'll lead fellow Taoist Lu into floating and sinking. You can see the magnificent mountains and rivers of floating and sinking. Fellow Taoist Lu hasn't been here yet, right? As a guest from afar, I can't be rude as the host. Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly. I don't dare to doubt Senior's words. Since I've achieved my goal, I won't disturb you any longer. I still have other places to go. Go Yu nodded understandingly. The two sides exchanged a few pleasantries before parting ways. Go Yu returned to his realm, but he was a little disappointed that he didn't know where to go. The last 3 realms didn't need him. He could imagine that since floating and sinking had been notified, Anchor Chain must be the same. It was just that luminous light and a few others were kept in the dark by Anchor Chain. This secret work was done well. However, Anchor Chain could have left 20 to 30 Yang spirits in 8 realms without anyone noticing. They couldn't be blamed. After all, their realms weren't high enough. This was a very cunning and flexible opponent. After seeing that the Alliance couldn't effectively stop him, he simply stopped looking for people to kill. Instead, he took all the credit for the Alliance. This could be considered a moderate blow to him and the 5th ring. He had seen deeply. Furthermore, his buttocks were sitting very upright. Chapter 1795. After this series of collisions, he already had some understanding of this hidden opponent. He was almost certain that he was not Hung River's helper, but had some kind of unknown connection with Hung River. In the end, he still chose to join the Alliance. This was a statement to tell him, between us is only a battle of Tao, nothing else. He knew when to advance and retreat. In fact, He had to compromise with the relatively unfamiliar Xiang Tian. No matter how many connections he had, he could not mobilize people as he wished. To deal with a strong person like Lu Xiaoyi, a strong primordial spirit, and Yang spirit was the minimum. Gu Xing, Yang, and Yin were already the strongest combination he could find. If he had more, it would not be his ability. How could such a strong person be manipulated by a few words and a few treasures? Therefore, there was a big change in the three realms. I won't find people to harm you, and I will help you pass the message. In fact, Lu Xiaoyi also ran a lot of errands, but this kind of gathering merit fell to others. It was also a kind of disguise competition. This bamboo hat man was very flexible and not constrained. He was a character. More than 70 or 80 years had passed. No matter what, in terms of purpose, he had achieved it. Whether it was done by himself or by others under pressure, it was done. These people all had the cultivation of Yang spirit. Needless to say, they had self-control and were able to see the big picture. It was impossible for them to gather together to fight. With the five-ring Yang spirit group as the leader, with the help of Zhou Xian's natural selection, the occasional dispute would not expand. He had to believe in their wisdom and that their thousands of years of life were not obtained by eating. When he was in the interior sky, Qing Xian and the marching monk inferred that the collapse of the 13th Great Way would happen in 100 or 200 years, leaning towards the period of a little more than 100 years. This inference was based on the experience after the collapse of the 12th Great Way. It was not completely nonsense. Then, he actually had at least 20 or 30 years. Should he go to the beast territory and wait? Or should he take this time to do something of his own? For him, go to Hung River boundary was a very simple matter. It would not take much time to go through the interior sky. He had made up his mind. Without any hesitation, he leaped up and went straight to the interior view sky. He skillfully operated it, and when he appeared again, he was already near Luo Sutian. He wasn't here to cause trouble for the monks. Even if he wanted to, it shouldn't be at this time. Even if the so-called three distresses really wanted to do something, they might not have the ability to do so. Under the general trend of cultivation, any individual's resistance was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Appearing in Luo Su's sky, he already had some understanding of the surrounding star field. 5 rings, blue sky, Luo Su sky, sun top, formed an irregular quadrilateral. The positions of the 5 rings were constantly changing. However, he had to remember these locations in his heart. It would save him a lot of time. After choosing a direction, he flew at full speed. 3 years later, he entered an area with a lack of spiritual energy. Here, cultivation planets were very rare. Occasionally, there would be low-quality cultivation planets, and even mid-quality cultivation planets were rare. This was a large area that the mainstream cultivation world didn't like. The universe was changing, and the Great Tao was collapsing. No one here cared about it. They couldn't even fly out of the universe, so what was the point of thinking about it? No matter how much the universe changed, how bad could it be? This was the difference between a low-level star and a high-level star. With different positions, their thoughts would naturally be different. For a low-level star, what they saw was more hope, and the space to go up was far greater than the space to go down. However, for a high-level star at the top of the cultivation world, the probability of falling down was higher. Lu Xiaoyi was searching. There were more than a dozen inferior cultivation planets in this enormous poor spirit sky territory. However, he wasn't familiar with the planet he was looking for because he was too weak when he left. He was so weak that he couldn't even determine the location of the planet. He was looking for a low-quality star, his real home planet. With senior sister Yin Dai's general description, he also relied on his own intuition. This was the answer he wanted to find for himself during his decades of free time. He couldn't think of anything if he only thought about it in the void. He needed an environment. Other than the low-quality star, he had nowhere to go. If he wanted to go to the low-quality star, he couldn't start from the 5th ring. At that time, the 5th ring was relatively close to the low-quality star. He also ran in the negative space for a few years. However, the 5th ring had flown out for 2,000 years, even if it flew very slowly. According to the star map, Luo Sutian was the closest to the poor spirit sky region. That was the reason why he returned to this path. After searching for 2 years, he found the only mid-quality cultivation planet in this area. The low-quality star was just around the corner. From afar, looking from the void of the universe, a pale yellow, thin, and ugly planet was hanging alone in the void. It was rotating contentedly, as if it was a different world from the universe outside. For Lu Xiaoyi, who had been out there for 2,000 years and had seen countless magnificent wonders in the universe, calling it ugly was a bit of an overstatement. If it were not for the fact that its name was Junior 3, he would not have taken a second look at such a celestial body. A son didn't mind his family being poor. A son didn't mind his mother being ugly. This was a planet that couldn't even be considered as cannon fodder in the cultivation world of the universe. However, when he looked at it, a feeling that he had never felt anywhere else spontaneously arose from the depths of his soul. It was the feeling of returning to his hometown after decades of wandering. His relatives and old friends were long gone. He was hesitant when he thought about it. He was afraid that someone would recognize him, but he knew that it was impossible. He was worried that everything had changed due to the change of environment. Even his local accent was a bit unfamiliar. He had to keep repeating it himself to find that feeling, homesickness. Even if he was a half-immortal, he couldn't avoid it. There were no cultivators coming in and out. In his memory, there seemed to be a few yuanying in the low-quality star. They were the kind of weak, nascent soul cultivators who didn't dare to leave the domain. Just like how Lu Xiaoyi couldn't even find the cultivation method after he reached the Zhuji phase. It was the same for the yuanying stage cultivators here. For them, the cultivation path above the yuanying stage was a completely strange one. There was nothing, and they could only rely on themselves to slowly explore. It was conceivable that with such strength, how would they dare to go out into the void and join the mainstream cultivation world of the universe? Therefore, this place was really empty. The few people who were qualified to come out didn't dare to come out, and the cultivators outside were too lazy to go in. In fact, not to mention the low-quality star, under normal circumstances, cultivators would try their best to avoid this area when passing by. How could there be any opportunities in such a place? They were all a bunch of poor cultivator beggars. Lu Xiaoyi's mood was complicated. He was a little sad. Yin Dai had invited him many times, but he was so busy that he could never find the time. In fact, when he thought about it carefully, what was he busy with? He just felt that there was no point in coming here. Now that he felt that he needed such an environment for his cultivation, he just came here. To him, missing his hometown was just the kind of shiny label that he stuck on the outside for others to see. In fact, he had never really thought about this place in his heart. He was also a hypocrite, no different from those Taoists and monks. Chapter 1796. When it was useful, it was his home planet. When it was useless, it was just an inconspicuous time in his memory. He was far inferior to senior sister Yin Dai in terms of mental state. It was a pity that he had never understood it. What was he thinking? He wasn't that kind of person. Did he think that as a transmigrator, he didn't have a home planet in this cultivation world? Or did he think that junior sister was no longer worthy of him? Only a super big world like the Five Rings world was worthy of Lu Xiaoyi's reputation. Usually, he didn't realize it. Only when he came back here did he understand what the so-called returning home meant. All the reasons were excuses. You didn't come back because you didn't want to. Now that you're back, it's because you want to get something from your hometown. As long as you want to, what can stop you from returning home? What can you delay? The sentimental sentiments of countless wanderers in their hometowns collapsed in front of him, and the beautiful words of literature collapsed with a loud bang. There was only one reason: selfishness. This included Lu Xiaoyi. With this feeling of self-blame, he restrained his breath to the extreme and quietly entered the clouds. He hesitated for a moment in the clouds. He was really a little timid, a little expectant, and a little worried. He He didn't know if what he saw would be the same as what he remembered if he passed through the clouds. He was like a mortal who had been away for many years. When he pushed open the door to his small courtyard, he was nervous. Did the owner change? Did they build a new grave? Did the elders have more white hair? Fortunately, he only needed to look at things and didn't need to think about people. He didn't need to waste his divine sense on this small planet. He only needed to look around to find a location of the illuminating kingdom in Pooh City. Pooh City was the same as what he remembered from 2,000 years ago. It was still an unknown third-tier city. This was determined by its inconspicuous geographical location. Even if the dynasties changed in the passage of time, its style couldn't be changed. Only the desert outside the city was closer to the city walls. This was due to the erosion of sand and wind, the invasion of nature. After 2,000 years, there were no mortal buildings that could remain intact after 2,000 years. They had all existed for countless generations, and no traces of their original state could be found. Only a few roads in the city still vaguely retained their original paths. This was a place where the pace of life was very slow. The universe was changing, and the dynasties were changing. When the news reached this place, it was silent. The original site in Lu Province was long gone. Not a single brick or tile was left behind. Speaking of which, with the level of construction technology here, wouldn't it have turned into dust by now? It was replaced by a small market, turning the original residential area of the rich into a market for the common people. It was very normal. After all, with the passage of time and the calamity of war, nothing could remain the same. Lu Xiaoyi found a small tavern in the original location of Lu Province. As he drank the familiar liquor, he thought about the location of the tavern. Was it a stable or a concierge of Lu Province? He had also chatted with Little Fool about the past, but he quickly gave up. The memories of mortals were completely oblivious to the changes 100 years ago, and they could only rely on guesses. They could only rely on what their ancestors had said, not to mention what happened 2,000 years ago. They only knew that in these 2,000 years, there had been 5 dynasties. Then, who would know about the so-called Lusima mansion from 5 dynasties ago? There were no records of it in the history books. It had completely disappeared, as if it had never existed. If one did not rely on cultivation, one could only rely on poetry and essays to leave behind something in this mortal world. Unfortunately, Lusima was just a bureaucrat. His poems were not passed down, and he did not leave behind any great achievements. He was also not bad enough to shake the heavens and earth. He was destined to be forgotten by history. When he left Pooh City, he had a loyal servant who was willing to protect his family. It was just a vision. How could a mortal family without extraordinary power protect him for 2,000 years? It was good that he had such intentions. He had never asked for extravagant wishes, so he was not disappointed. Sitting there, he was in a relaxed mood. It was just a kind of helpless reminiscence. He recalled the bits and pieces of his past when he was the young master of Lu Province. There is only one place left in Pooh City that could still occupy a place in his memory. Chow Fong Brothel, where young Master Lusima often called his friends to drink wine. It was an ancient profession and ancient inheritance. It had more vitality than the 3 pure ones. One could not help but sigh at the wonders of this world. The brothel had been renovated countless times, but the big Agarwood plaque was still intact. No matter how many times it was painted, it could not hide the vicissitudes of time. Thus, Chow Fong Brothel had another strange guest. He ordered a table full of his favorite dishes, but he did not touch them at all. He just stared blankly at the lights outside the window and drank by himself. The high-spirited voices of the youths came from the private room next to him, urging him to drink. The topic was not far from riding a horse and carrying a sword, becoming a disciple, cultivating, becoming a mutant. It was just like their small group 2,000 years ago. Yes, little 7. Reincarnation, it was always reincarnating. Life was reincarnating, and so were stories. The music girl beside him saw that he was unhappy, so she spoke softly. What is the young master unhappy about? If you say it out loud, I might be able to enlighten you. Don't keep it in your heart to avoid harming your body. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Here it comes again. The small farm in the south of Pu City had not been expanded into a city or a town. The other cities in the Kingdom of Darkness had their own development, but Pu City was bad because it was adjacent to the Gobi Desert. It was not a livable place, so after 2,000 years, the population did not increase much. Who would be willing to place their ancestral property in a place that was destined to be swallowed by the desert? Therefore, it was still a farm, but it had changed owners countless times. The current owner obviously did not care much about this place, so the whole field was perfunctory and slightly dilapidated. His mother's and Aunt Kai's tombs had long been flattened. It was not their bodies that were flattened, but time. However, Lu Xiaoyi could still accurately find the right place, because he had used the power of a cultivator to reinforce the underground after he built his foundation. The so-called power of a cultivator at that time was extremely laughable now, but to a large extent, many things underground were preserved. This was his luck. He still built a shed, just like what he had done 2,000 years ago. He also did not think about how to repair it or how to bury it grandly again. His mother did not like this. She liked quiet and less disturbing. The most important thing was the thought. He came back and chatted with his mother here, as if he was closer to his two relatives here. He should have come back long ago. It was just some trivial matters. He would say whatever he thought of, softly reciting it to his relatives in the other world. This was a late sacrifice. His mother and Aunt Kai would not blame him. He knew, but he was blaming himself. It was because he had encountered a problem and needed his mother's help, just like every time he encountered trouble when he was young. Even if you were a half immortal, you were still raised by a mother. Chapter 1797. Your son is in trouble. Mother, I don't know who I was in the past. Lu Xiaoyi murmured. Who do you want me to be? An ordinary young master from Lu Province? A traveler from a different time and space? Or a continuation of some great existence? Of course, he didn't expect his mother to answer him. What he needed here was a special mood in such an environment. Humans were so strange. Different environments could produce different moods. Some things couldn't be understood in the void of the universe, but here his thoughts were exceptionally clear, as if his mother was by his side. He asked and answered his own questions and confessed his feelings. He knew what his mother would think, just like how his mother knew him. Ever since I came to this body, you've felt the difference, haven't you? Don't lie to me. No mother wouldn't know her son's character. When I started cultivating, you might have completely understood that there must be some reason that changed your son. But you never asked. It's impossible that you never thought about it. You were afraid that if you really asked, you would lose your son? Mother, I didn't know anything at that time. I thought I could deceive everyone, and you would slowly get used to it. But now I know that no mother can accept the fact that her son has fused with another soul. Yes, I am your son, but I'm also not. Some things in this world are hard to explain, but in your son's heart, I've always been your son, and always will be. Lu Xiaoyi let go of his emotions. Let his emotions control him, and let his tears fall. This was the first time in his 2,000 years of cultivation that he had let go of his identity as a cultivator to consider problems. He now had only one identity, his mother's son. I know, this kind of blow to you is no less harmful than being exposed to the scorching sun. I'm also a murderer, just like every willful child who unconsciously hurts the person who loves him the most. I didn't understand at that time. I thought everything was flawless. Actually, when you asked my father the question, what you really wanted to ask was this, right? You actually wanted to ask who I am. I'm sorry, Mother. I really didn't understand at that time. I really didn't understand. Lu Xiaoyi was somewhat unable to control himself. These memories from back then were still vivid in his mind. Now that he thought about it, he finally understood the deeper meaning behind it. But at that time, he was still a madman who wholeheartedly cultivated and aspired to reach the starry skies. He thought that he was filial to his mother, but that was only his own opinion. In fact, in his heart, he placed more importance on his own ideals. but neglected the feelings of the people around him. His mother didn't ask him directly until she died. Thinking about it now, he felt as if his heart was being cut by a knife. This was not an isolated phenomenon. In fact, many young people were in such a state when their relatives were still alive. When they experienced life and had their own families and children, they realized it, but it was already too late. Choking, she said, "I'm a foreign soul that doesn't belong to this space-time. No mother is willing to let her child go through all this. You are the same. Therefore, my past shouldn't be like that." This is the wish of every mother. It has nothing to do with becoming good or bad. Your son understands now. I hope it's not too late. In the depths of his soul, something deeply hidden was slowly revealing itself. This was something that he had consciously or unconsciously suppressed for 2,000 years. He suppressed it so much that he forgot about its existence. The so-called past and future were originally things in the category of spiritual consciousness. If you think it exists, it exists. If you think it doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. This was the most natural manifestation, not some kind of deliberate memory or forgetting. This new thing was his past, the third part of his past, a past that even a half-immortal couldn't discover. The past of the young master of Lu province. Do you want your son to be the continuation of a great existence? Continue such greatness? Maybe be extraordinary? I know you don't want to. You don't even want your son to be tainted by the legacy of your father, not to mention the great legacy that may change the entire universe and the future of mankind. Your biggest wish is that your son can live well, live a long life, have children, and be free from illness and disaster, right? What is the relationship between the kingdom of sunshine and the Lu family? What is the relationship between this planet and the Lu family? What is the relationship between the entire human race and the Lu family? In your eyes, your son is your country, your planet, and your universe, right? Fine, let's not care about them. Lu Xiaoyi gradually understood his own thoughts as he answered his own questions. When the third part of his past appeared, he realized that he had never been able to erase the real Lu Xiaoyi's consciousness. He had just suppressed it to the deepest part of his consciousness, to the point that he had forgotten about it. Reincarnation was a bullshit Xiantian Dao. He didn't like it. He even rejected the helplessness in the sixth Tao. He valued the present world more, because he had a mother in the present world. This was something that no one could force him to forget. Perhaps the legend of the sword and fairy was a part of the past. That was all. Perhaps the previous life was a short memory. That was all. As a soul that had merged with many consciousnesses, the most important thing was that there must be a master and a subordinate. Who exactly are you? Who are you based on? If you're determined on the present, you will have a definite past. Mother, I am Lu Xiaoyi. I am your son, and I have never changed. I may be muddle-headed sometimes, but in essence, I am the young master of the Lu province, Lu Xiaoyi, that you wish to see. As soon as Lu Xiaoyi confirmed his present, the third segment of the past in the depths of his soul suddenly spread out, covering the sky and the earth. The countless segments of the past of the Lu family's young master and every ordinary person surged out. At this point, he was the same as all the natives of this cultivation world. He also had countless pasts and countless reincarnations, but there were two that were more special. A normal life, a normal past. He was no longer the Lu Xiaoyi who was shocked by the legend of the sword and fairy. He was a Lu Xiaoyi who had the same weakness and the same unbearable. Did he lose it? Perhaps. In the past, no one dared to cut his past, but now they did. Did he get it? Of course. He had truly found his true self. Even without the special past of his previous life, without the mysterious origin of the legend of the sword and fairy, he was still the terrifying Lu Xiaoyi in the universe. He would still walk down the path that he should walk. He would still not hesitate to overturn the heavens. Who said that a cultivator without a glorious reincarnation experience wouldn't have a future? Ordinary ants could still change the heavens and the earth. He had never been so full of confidence in himself in this moment. I am just an ordinary person, a restless young master of the Lu province. I had some lucky encounters and met some miraculous things that helped me on the path of cultivation. But in the end, I am the young master of the Lu province, Lu Xiaoyi. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.